Hey guys, howdy, I hope you are fine. As you seen in the thumbnail, in this video, we are gonna see what if Naruto married Rhea? Part 1. I request you to check the author of this fanfic and show some love and support. Name of the story is An Extraordinary Sage's Not So Ordinary Adventure by Red Fist Canon. Do check it out. All details in description. And if you want next part of this series, please leave a like and comment 5 blue emoji. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Naruto X Daenerys Targaryen L uncensored spicy version, link in description. I've never fully believed in his existence, for I thought it was nothing more than a myth. A man who walked the earth before the gods themselves. Surely it must be a jest. For that sounds the furthest away from a man. But alas, I was proven wrong. For we were one day visited by a man who resembled the one described in the ancient texts. Hair that looked to be woven from gold. Eyes that resembled the sun itself and a body that surpassed any warrior's. If that were not enough, the man had the audacity to empty our entire supply of flour. And for what else but his own personal meal? Preposterous. Inconceivable. And what even is this ramen he spoke so highly of? Testimony of a scribe of a rural Chinese village, 4900 BC. From Tales of the Great Sage, by Professor Fujino Yasuhiro. There were virtually no creatures, apart from the oldest primordials who could recall the age of shinobi, a period that preceded the golden age of humanity and succeeded the first age. The age of shinobi has long been considered the briefest era of world history, lasting only a few centuries as opposed to eons or millennia. It began with the Sage of the Sea. XTH paths bestowing the gift of chakra onto humanity and ended with a mass extinction event triggered by Gaia. None but a few beings out there could remember the exact sequence of events, but rumor has it started with a war that engulfed the world and shook the continents. It was a period that blurred the lines between godhood and mortality, where multiple men and women amassed so much power they would have been able to stand toe-to-toe with many modern pantheons. But among all these powerhouses, a lone being stood off from the rest of the earthly creatures. A figure known by many names, he most famous of which would be, the gallant sage of the East. Despite the abundance of records detailing his sightings and interactions with men and women throughout human history, he was a cryptid even among the higher plane. None but the primordials and the elder deities of each pantheon could ascertain his existence nowadays. It does create a sense of paranoia among them. The thought of a being with so much power left unchecked was worrying. Who knows what such a creature could be planning? What sort of evil machinations could they be concocting? Chiba Prefecture, Japan, spring of 2000. Slurp. Crunch crunch. Hey, Pops. Yes son. I'm bored. Wait. Don't you dare. Hi. Bored, I'm Dad. UGGHHHHHH. Slurp. A couple sat in a seiza position on top of a cliff overlooking the sea. Well, one was sitting, the other was writhing in what appeared to be physical pain on the ground. The tallest was a blond man, holding a hot ceramic bowl of raw men in his calloused hands and using chopsticks to inhale the noodles at an almost inhuman pace. His whiskered cheeks were puffed out while his eyes were closed in bliss, making the man resemble a fox. Despite his seemingly non-threatening appearance, his body spoke of a different matter entirely. As he knocked the bowl back to drink the still steaming broth, the shirt he was wearing hiked up, showing his toned abs decorated by red flame-like orange markings. The same markings went over his arms in a manner resembling a tattoo. As he was done with his meal, the bowl disappeared in his left hand. In a puff of smoke while a similar bowl appeared in his right hand, which the man proceeded to attack with the same vigor. He did not seem the least bit disturbed with how his lunchmate was acting. ND continued to consume the noodly goodness with the enthusiasm. Slurp. His companion, however, looked less human. The average person would probably mistake them for an imp because of their small stature, a little under 3 feet. And their midnight black complexion, partially covered by a child-sized green yukata. The little creature was barely getting back together from the reflexive disgust. It felt towards the terrible attempt at humor and looked back for the whole fried chicken it had been munching on. Shrugging, it took a bite out of it, consuming both meat and bones in one go. Hen looked up at the one they called Pops, the large yellow dots that served as its eyes being filled with curiosity. It finished swallowing the food before opening its Glasgow-like mouth to speak. Sue, what should we do today? Gulp. The blonde swallowed the handful of noodles he had shoved in his mouth before shifting his own strange set of eyes onto the creature. A pair of blue eyes with a central golden ring gazed upon the one the man considered his son. "Ma, I'm up for anything you want," he replied nonchalantly, shrugging his shoulders before continuing his meal. His son scratched his horned head in thought, removing the large cone hat he wore in the process and revealing his moss-colored hair. The smaller male contemplated their next course of action. It has been a few decades since anything exciting happened in the world. Ever since the end of World War II, Asia did have a few skirmishes here and there that occupied the duo, but nothing as major as the Great War. He wouldn't complain about peace, as moderate as it was, because that seemed like something his own father yearned for. But he still wished for something to do. They had already been all over the world, traveling the 5 continents for millennia in search of adventure and great foodstuffs. However, the blonde had insisted on staying in the Far East for the last few centuries. Naruto and Uzumaki was strong, perhaps one of the strongest beings on the planet. There was little in the world that he felt apprehension towards. Well, anything not omnipotent, that is. I'm strong too, not as much as Pop's obvious. But I can hold my own, and if push comes to shove, I'll just call for help, the shorter of the duo thought. There had to be a sensible reason for his father's decision, but for the life of him, he couldn't think about anything. Maybe it was his own apathy towards most living creatures that weren't his family or those he considered precious, but there was simply no valid excuse for them not to do whatever they wanted. After all, who's gonna stop us? You know, I've been getting sick of Japan and Asia in general. We traveled everywhere here. And yeah, the dishes are great and all, the people too, sometimes. But I just wanted some more variety. Why can't we visit Europe again? Or the Americas? Asked the little guy. Naruto sighed, putting his empty bowl down and gazing upon the sea in thought. It's complicated. Well, make it not complicated. The son crossed his arms and rumbled, to which the blonde raised an eyebrow at the unexpected lip. Little sassy guy, aren't you? Naruto asked, making Zetsu wince and grumble under his breath. A good way to put it is, I can't afford to go there anymore. How? You're stronger than ever, Pops. The green-haired young man almost screamed in exasperation. That's just it, Zetsu. I'm too strong. Do you realize how threatened my very presence makes people feel? Let alone beings who can actually sense my power. The blonde explained and gestured widely. At Zetsu's incredulous gaze, he decided to elaborate. What do you think happens when someone unfamiliar with us meets either of us? The short man scratched his head. They'd, flee. Naruto shook his head. While that may be true for weak creatures like most humans and monsters, it's another story when it comes to deities or beings of a higher power, especially those with too much pride for their own good. Zetsu tilted his head as he listened to his father. Most of those beings would see me as a threat, regardless of my intentions. And what do you think they'd do if I enter their zones of influence? Let me prance around? He questioned his son, who nodded his head in understanding. No, they wouldn't. Many of them would start blasting before asking questions, regardless of where I was, Naruto continued. You've never truly experienced it because of your own ability to suppress yourself, but me. This is all I had to deal with for the first few thousand years of my life. If it wasn't that stupid Jade Emperor throwing his army at people like me or my siblings, I wouldn't have garnered any reputation here. The man yelled in irritation. But why stay here then? Why stay anywhere? Asked Zetsu. Because now, people know I'm not someone to mess around with. The Taoists and Hindus know to keep their distance, and the Shinto are alright with me. Amaterasu-chan made sure of that. Not to mention I have allies here. Don't forget your uncles in the Sage Realm. Zetsu nodded at the explanation, thinking deeply. It really makes sense when I think about it. Pops and Uncle Kerr, Ama alone are some of the top dogs out there, so there's really nothing to fear. Plus everyone in Asia sort of keeps their distance from us. Naruto had forged many friendships among the supernatural in the Asian continent. Many of them strong enough to be considered a pantheonic threat like he himself was. He had a pull here that he lacked in the other parts of the globe, especially in the West. Etsu heard and read a lot of bad things about the so-called gods dominating the Western Hemisphere. Be it Zeus' vindictiveness and paranoia, Odin's similar but more calculative personality, or even Ra's sheer sadism. But compared to their power base, there really wasn't anything the Western pantheons could pull that would catch them flat-footed. They simply had too much raw power to be challenged. But that doesn't mean either of the pantheons would be cowed into non-violence. They had too much pride and too little care for anything they considered below them. Naruto wasn't afraid to fight them. But any fight he might get into could become very destructive, damaging both the environment and the populations living in the region. Something that he, as a sage, cannot allow himself to do. But Zetsu found himself racking his brain for another argument. He didn't personally care as much as his father for any potential consequences their presence could cause, but he had thought up a way to prevent those scenarios, and he hoped Naruto would agree. I mean, we don't have to announce ourselves, you know. I could use air, you know, that, the little guy tried to convince his father. You mean the technique you've been working on? What did you call it? The man scratched his whiskered cheek in thought. Mole in plain sight, Zetsu spoke with a level of pride. The technique had been his pet project for quite a while, and one that could offer up a solution for their dilemma. It was a similar skill to the second Tsuchikage's dustless bewildering cover, which hid the user's presence and chakra completely from other shinobi. Zetsu initially wanted to take it a step further, and completely erase the user from everyone's radar, including all-seeing beings like the astral or sky deities of multiple pantheons. Failing to accomplish that goal, Zetsu opted to shift his objective from erasing one's presence to blending it with the surroundings. The technique was powered purely by senjutsu, which he and his father were both masters of. Nature chakra would constantly coat the body in a thin, opaque layer while sending a mist of diluted chakra in the areas surrounding the user. Nature chakra would act as a masking agent for the other kinds of chakra within the body, thus making it seem as if the user was made of pure senjutsu, or pass him off as a nature spirit. Since he and his father both had a great grasp on senjutsu, that was an easy task. The problem, however, I got it down, but I still have an issue. The jutsu depends on the user's concentration. You have to be constantly focusing on it to maintain it. This means that any lapse of focus could land us in the crosshairs of any supernatural being with a sensing capability, explained Zetsu, while Naruto gained a surprised look followed by a proud one. You did. That's my boy. Bahahaha. The blonde father laughed joyously as he scooped up his child and held him up, much to the son's annoyance. After all, that was an achievement of the highest order. Hiding their power from other deities was near impossible. If they made themselves invisible to the eye with a jutsu, they could still be detected by powerful sensors. Simply walking into a pantheon whose authority they had no positive relations with was out of the question, especially if what he heard about that Zeus brat was true. His son, however, was ironically like a sponge. Hey, get it? Because he was half plant, he simply absorbed information and thought up unpredictable ways to use it. Quite the outside the box like himself at his age, but his boy was also a born genius. That was far from the first jutsu he invented, but Naruto still felt a swell of fatherly pride every time his boy made such discoveries. But Zetsu's problem was a pretty big one. Old as he was, Naruto was still Naruto, meaning he could never give all his focus to a single task for too long a period. Especially considering the technique will need to stay active when they inevitably go to sleep for the night. It simply wasn't possible for them to remain completely hidden for such a long time within the other party's radar. Then again, did they really have to? Naruto has been alive for eons. He had more than enough time to become the master of masters of the shinobi arts, especially the art of fuinjutsu and the knowledge behind jutsu shikis and even some of the Western runes. The idea came to him almost instantly. A seal to act as a nature chakra battery with a multi-layered jutsu shiki to act as both a chakra filter and a circuit around the body. The proud father narrowed his eyes, ignoring his son's trashing as the boy attempted to escape the hold of his captor's fatherly pride. Now all I need to do is put the idea into practice. Ouch, Naruto yelped as Zetsu finally had enough and opted to use his powerful teeth to bite at his father's arms. Let me down, Pops. Not until you learn to accept my fatherly affection. Are you seriously trademarking this? Screw you, I'm the best dad in the world, I can trademark fatherhood itself. Besides, oh number, I wouldn't be much of a patent if I wasn't the best I could be. Get it? The fool stood defiant. The king brought down his judgment. The fool laughed in mirth. And chaos enveloped the earth. Excerpt from apocryphal Taoist texts found in the Huanghe Valley, 390 BC. Alluded to refer to the mythological, heavenly war between the Jade Emperor and the Great Sage. East Highland Park in Richmond, Virginia, 1st of June, 2000. In one of the park's clearings, Naruto woke up to the first rays of dawn. It's been a few months since his son had announced his great accomplishment, and Naruto had stayed awake for the next few weeks working on the seal and Shiki formulas. Making the individual seals had always been easy. It was the inevitable trial and error of constructing a new Jutsu Shiki circuit to complement the seals that always took time. But then, the end result spoke for itself, as it always did nowadays. Both Naruto and Zetsu could now walk into the heart of a pantheon and be mistaken for nature spirits, if a little stronger than the average one, but nothing to raise an alarm about. As long as neither used any of their bigger techniques and stuck to the more basic ninjutsu, there would be nothing to worry about. Yawning deeply and stretching his back to like one might compare to a cat, he inadvertently woke the small group of animals that had taken to spend the night on various parts of his body. A sparrow that had nested in his hair chirped angrily at the rude awakening and flew off to a nearby branch. A litter of fox cubs that had curled up on his stomach yipped at the sudden movement and scrambled off to run into the bushes. A few other rodents that had leaned into him reacted similarly, albeit more out of surprise than fear or panic. Naruto laughed, hee, sorry guys, a man shouldn't stay in bed earlier than the sunrise, you know. Pops! A voice called out from a nearby tree. The blonde turned from his position on the grass to see his son had woke up as well and was gripping one of the lower branches lazily, reminding him idly of a small chimp. Well, good morning my dear boy. How's it hanging? Naruto exclaimed jovially. Oh god, please don't start, it's too early for this. Zetsu felt himself go slack as his father waved him off. Nah, never too early for quality comedy. The little man groaned and let himself fall before ambling over to his father. Both of them had chosen to spend the night in the park, instead of a hotel like any sane person would. Both of them being sages made them feel more at home in a grassy field or a thick forest than in any five-star hotel. It had been something of a habit for both father and son to simply sleep where they found themselves at night, never worrying about shelter. So what's for today? I was thinking we could try the Chinese food here, it's different from the authentic stuff, Zetsu asked, looking up at his father. Huh? Didn't you say you were getting sick of it? I got bored of the same flavors they used in China. Apparently the selection here uses a lot of local ingredients and even cha. Nges up the cooking recipes so the result is pretty different, the little man said. That's so. The blonde looked pensive before nodding to himself. Yup, Chinese breakfast food sounded good, they could always get ramen for lunch or just do some meat shopping since Zetsu was such a connoisseur. Yosh, let's go. Naruto crowed excitedly and started speed walking to the entrance of the park, all the while ignoring the looks he was getting from early joggers. Zetsu shook his little head. Even though his father was older than most things on the planet, he still acted the same hyperactive way even after the millennia they spent together. Later on, they happened upon one of the more popular food chain restaurants and much to the bafflement of the waiting staff proceeded to order two of everything on the menu. When their orders arrived, both analyzed the platters with a critical eye, unwittingly making their waitress sweat, before each picked up a fried wonton and threw it in their mouths. Ellipsis. Munch munch. ... Ellipsis. Ellipsis. On that day, Naruto and Zetsu Uzumaki solemnly swore never to touch Chinese American cuisine again. The day passed pretty quickly for the duo of tourists. There wasn't much to do in Richmond that would interest them. And both were still pretty upset about their breakfast. While the food had tasted good enough, the problem lay in the label. You cannot simply why half the ingredients then call it Chinese? Since when do Chinese recipes include so much oil? And don't even get me started on the flavor. Sugar and salt are not fucking seasonings. You don't just drown your chicken in it. Naruto ranted bitterly. So he had a refined palate. Sue him. He's been alive for longer than these recipes have existed. He practically invented some of these. He had half a mind to barge into the kitchen and give the cooks a piece of his mind, but Zetsu, bless his soul, seemed to know his father's train of thought and convinced him against it. The cooks weren't at fault. It was whoever's sorry excuse for an entrepreneur who thought that making a quick buck was worth practically scamming people out. Nevertheless, the blonde calmed himself and put the entire thing behind him. He needed to focus on the future. There were so many more towns to visit. So much food to eat and so much fun to be had. He and his boy were going to bond. The son in question had shifted his appearance into that of a small blonde and blue-eyed child. He tried going for the most inconspicuous look he could get, which would logically be one that resembled his dad. It made Naruto blush at the wholesome sight. He needed to immortalize this image. The father hurriedly took his camera and hollered at his son to stand in front of a random landmark they passed by. He wanted to take pictures of his adorable son. As Naruto proceeded to barrage a reluctant Zetsu with pictures taken at different angles, he was unaware of the wary looks he was receiving from the onlookers. The man was decked out in dark green cargo shorts and an open kimono shirt with a swirl design, over a white t-shirt with the words, "No ramen no life," written in bold orange text. He looked like what one might expect the stereotypical tourist to dress like, and that image was further amplified by the straw hat and blue-tinted round sunglasses he favored. But what seemed like the cherry on top of the entire, frankly embarrassing, ensemble was the footwear. Naruto was wearing Crocs and felt absolutely no shame for it. Zetsu insisted on keeping his head down in shame at his father's horrifying fashion sense, despite the latter's incessant demands to give him a winning smile. The photo session finished as quickly as it started, and the dad continued dragging his son through the city, even opting to carry him on his shoulders as one would do to a toddler. Zetsu hated that he kind of liked being babied and doted on by Naruto. As annoying as the man was sometimes, with his antics and god-awful dad jokes, Zetsu still very much loved his father and the attention he received from him. He could understand slightly where his dad was coming from, having been told bits and pieces of the blonde's past through some of his more loose-lipped uncles. Naruto never liked talking about his past, but the way he handled all the tragedies he suffered as a mortal and translated them to a titanic amount of love for his precious people spoke well of his character. The blonde created him thousands of years ago. The green-haired youth was born from Naruto's will and would have happily served his creator as a tool to be used and discarded. That was how much loyalty Zetsu had in him since he came into the world. It was an instinct that he later learned was also present in his predecessor, the first Zetsu created from Otsutsuki Kagaya's own will. However, unlike that wretched woman, his father had gone through the length of not only seeing him as his progeny but also giving him the childhood that the elder Uzumaki never got. Be it carrying him like a toddler everywhere in his first few years, or celebrating every birthday as a family, Naruto never hesitated to shower his son with love and care. He satisfied his childish curiosity and did everything in his power to support the younger male's dreams and desires. That was one of the many reasons the blonde would always be the most respected figure in Zetsu's heart. It was also the reason he took upon himself an oath to never end up like the first Zetsu. He never wanted to cause his family pain or stray from the moral path laid down by his father. Zetsu would always be by his father's side, even with the latter's embarrassing antics. As night fell, the pair found themselves having a walk along with one of the quieter neighborhoods in the city. It had barely been a few days since they'd arrived in the city and Naruto was ready to hop to another state. Zetsu was of a similar opinion. He'd already gotten his fill from visiting the local parks and butcher shops, and subsequently getting dragged out of them by Naruto after verbally assaulting some of the vendors. The shorter male was as obsessed with meat of all kinds as Naruto was with noodles. While his father had explicitly forbidden him from eating human flesh or the flesh of innocent humanoid creatures, everything else was fair game. Zetsu made sure to use that freedom to its fullest, experimenting and enjoying the flesh of nearly every creature he could sink his teeth into, and that his dad did not blacklist. He has come to consider himself as very knowledgeable in his hobby and would not tolerate people giving less than their best when serving him, which was demonstrated through the metaphorical roast he delivered upon some of the vendors that did not give him a satisfying deal. Their customers had edged away from the tiny child, who brought grown men to tears with his words, which had caused Naruto to make a tactical exit every time. Ellipsis. While Zetsu was silently contemplating on the day he spent, Naruto simply closed his eyes and let his senses sweep over the entire district. He did not even need to use Sage Mode. His senses had become very sharp over time, to the degree he could map out his surroundings in his mind. It was always an interesting experience for him, to simply let his spirit wander over the area around him. It served both as a means of staying alert, and stress-relieving practice. The distinct sounds of bestial growling and startling human shouts suddenly assaulted his ears. His eyes snapped open as his body tensed in response, something that did not go unnoticed by Zetsu. Before the younger Uzumaki could ask, the blonde blurred out from sight in a burst of speed. An image of the scene had already formed within his mind's eye and he had to react accordingly. While a body flicker would have been faster, the sage still had to maintain his cover. Naruto ran at subsonic speeds before jumping and bouncing off the walls of nearby buildings. He ran the entire distance in less than a few seconds before he found himself soaring over the scene of trouble. Two abnormally big black wolves, each about the size of a sedan, had cornered what looked like two young teenagers and a child to the back wall of the alley. The blonde did not bother observing the obvious victims. He landed on the wall above the three in a crouch, before rocketing at Treme Ndous speeds towards the two large canines. To any onlookers, the movement would have been nigh instantaneous. A yellow blur suddenly passed by the animals before the two exploded into golden dust. The man landed in a crouch, arms crossed over his chest and hands drawn out in a chopping motion. He stood up, put his hands on his hips, and cracked his neck to the side before turning towards the three kids. The oldest teenager, a lanky blonde-haired youth dressed in a t-shirt and a pair of torn jeans, held what looked like a bronze golf club in front of him in a threatening manner. Although from the expression on his face, he was still recovering from the shock of the sudden rescue. The same could be said for his older female companion, a young black-haired lass in a punk ensemble who held a bronze spear up in front of her. One of her hands held the shoulder of the last of the trio, a little blonde girl of about 7 years who, while hiding behind the leg of the black-haired teenager, LL grasped a small hammer tightly in her hand. Naruto's fatherly instincts flared up immediately at the scene. The three didn't look injured, a little roughed up from running probably, but nothing to be alarmed about. However, being the caring person that he was, the sage had to make sure the three were doing well. So, putting on his best foxy grin and raising a hand in greeting, he tried to disarm the situation and calm them down the best way he knew how to. "Hey kids, a bit of a rough night we have, ain't it?" he asked, and could almost hear the groan of disappointment from an approaching Zetsu. The two teens still looked wary. Even if the Ravenet cringed in response before a tiny giggle erupted from the little girl. Naruto's grin only widened. "Oh. Is that some appreciative laughter I hear? Huh. Finally. Someone who appreciates my perfect talent." The little blonde only giggled harder, eventually infecting both teenagers with her childlike mirth and letting their guard drop a little. "Who are you?" asked the lanky blonde, still holding up the golf club, but in a more relaxed manner. Naruto closed his eyes and tilted his head. "Isn't it more polite to introduce yourself before asking others?" The boy narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Fine, I'm Luke," the boy huffed before gesturing to his two companions. "This is Talia and the kid is Annabeth." He was swiftly elbowed by Talia, who proceeded to admonish him. "Luke, don't just give our names to a stranger. You saw what he did. He could be a monster." Her shout prompted an offended look to appear on Naruto's face. "Oi oi oi, monster. I ain't no monster girly. Do I look like a monster? Name's Naruto. I'm just a guy who can punch stuff real good," he exclaimed while waving his hands in protest. "Don't screw with me. No mortal could do what you did." Talia refused to back down and held up her spear threateningly. "Mortal. Monster," thought Naruto, registering her accusation before realizing, "Oh, if I focus a lit. I can faintly see these kids' connections, they're probably demigods." The connections he was talking about were the faint bridges of energy that linked the trio to separate domains. Those connecti-ons would usually be barely visible for demigods, as they did not have the same amount of control over the domains that their godly parents had. He thought over his next course of actions. He couldn't very well come out and admit his real identity, so he settled on what he and Zetsu discussed. Ha. Well, you got me. I'm not normal. I'm what you would call a clear-sighted mortal. I trained very hard to become strong. So I couldn't let these bad dogs hurt you, kids. If I was a monster, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. Talia frowned before huddling with Luke to discuss Naruto's words quietly. While that was happening, Zetsu finally made his appearance, having shifted his body to look like a teenage version of Naruto, albeit leaner and dressed in a less ridiculous manner. Pops, who are these kids? The younger Uzumaki asked, snapping the two demigods from their discussion. The youngest blonde had taken to hiding behind them and poked her head out to look at the newcomer. Huh, we're the same age. And who are you? The Ravenet questioned. Oh. Naruto grabbed his son by the shoulder and gestured toward him proudly, uncaring of the younger Uzumaki's annoyance at the action. This is Zetsu, my son. He likes grilled meat and gardening. Ain't he a handsome fella? He almost shouted in glee, as he did every time he introduced his little boy. Zetsu grumbled under his breath, saying something along the lines of, I could have just introduced myself, before looking at the three kids in front of him. Looking at the scene and the pure expression of happiness on the older blonde's face. The older demigods felt their worries ebb away. For some reason, they could not help but trust the elder blonde. He simply had an air of warmth around him that compelled them to let their guard down. The youngest girl strode forward, while Talia let her, not bothering to call her back but still watching the man with a wary eye. The child stood in front of Zetsu and gave him a toothy smile in greeting. I'm Annabeth. I like books and architecture. Nice to meet you Zetsu and Mr. Naruto. Her gray eyes looked up at the man. Naruto grinned and Zetsu tensed in dread. You are Sue getting adopted. The sage thought in glee. The Jade Emperor kneeled from exhaustion, his features marred with sweat, grime, and ichor. His once pristine robes were barely held up at the seams and his red hair, once expertly coiffed, was singed and messy. But the most problematic injury seemed to be on his forehead, which was grasped tightly by his left hand as ichor escaped through his fingers. His opponent walked towards him with a steady gait, hefting an obsidian-colored bow staff on his shoulder. The large man stopped before the kneeling redhead, and the latter needn't look up to see the man's cold expression. It is saddening that it had to come to this, the man spoke looking down at the kneeling deity who only chuckled mirthlessly. Saddening. Please, spare me those false platitudes. It would have always come to this. The Jade Emperor snarled. Would it? I have offered you my hand in friendship many a time. If you had tried letting go of your useless pride, then we could have lived side by side as allies. The man's tone was a contrasting calm to the Emperor's rising ire. Side by side. With humanity. With demons. You dare imply our kind would ever stoop so low as to consider you lot our equals? The deity's face had started to purple in rage. The sage simply smiled pityingly at the fuming man, inadvertently causing his anger to boil even more. Immortality is a privilege. The power you hold is a privilege. Only our kind should have access to it. How dare you besmirch our land with your very existence? The red-haired emperor finally lost it and removed the hand he held to his face, showing a healed third eye. The organ that allowed him almost complete control over the natural forces of the universe. In response, the sage shifted the staff into a mala bead bracelet, and clasped his hands in prayer in front of him, eyes closed. Jade Emperor. No, Okwang, there is one thing you and these other gods never seem to understand. The sage opened his eyes, as a grim smile slowly bloomed on his face and his power spiked in response to the deity's own. And that is a creature's infinite potential for evolution. Thus, their battle resumed once more. A battle forgotten by time many millennia ago. What is this? Zetsu knew who he was from the second his eyes first opened. The first thing he ever saw was the giant face of a whiskered blonde man giving him a large toothy grin. He knew who he was. This is my lord. The man's grin did not waver, even as he opened his mouth to speak. Hey, there little fella. He cooed softly, what should I name you? Assuming the question was directed to him, Zetsu automatically gave his response. I am Zetsu, he said emotionlessly, before continuing, what is my purpose? The man lost his smile as his face morphed into an unrecognizable emotion. The man uttered, which Zetsu assumed is a request for clarification. My lord, what is my life's purpose? The newborn intoned. The man staggered, still holding the little boy. What? Purpose? What do you mean, boyo? Why are you asking me? Shouldn't you know? Should I? You are my creator, I shall thus serve you to the best of my ability, Zetsu answered simply as if speaking about the weather. Huh? Why you? Zetsu-chan. No, that's not I. The man seemed confused, he wasn't making an entire and concise sentence. Did I do something wrong? The boy asked innocent. Lee and the man finally snapped out of his stupor, he looked at him and muttered something inaudible under his breath. The silence between them stretched for a long time as the man gazed at him, although his eyes were distant as if he was lost in thought. Finally coming out of his stupor, the man frowned before his expression shifted into a gentle one. His voice was but a whisper yet his words were heavy. Zetsu-chan, you are my son. The blond man then held Zetsu above and turned him around. Zetsu finally saw where they were. His vision was filled with pink as he saw the forest of cherry blossoms they stood in the middle of. The newborn was momentarily taken aback by the beauty of it all, so much so that his eyes involuntarily watered. I am your father, the man said kindly yet firmly. If there was any way to describe it, Zetsu would say his soul suddenly felt lighter, although he had no idea why. This beautiful world is yours to explore and to frolic in, grow up to be healthy, strong, and happy. But most importantly Zetsu-chan. The young Uzumaki was hooked on his father's every word. Your purpose is whatever you decide it to be. These words would remain etched into the newborn's soul for the rest of eternity. Bull Run Regional Park in Manassas, Virginia, 7th of June, 2000. Zetsu. Zetsu. The annoying voice of his father brought him out of the memory. What pops? What is it? He snapped at the man. The sage pouted like a child before looking at the blonde girl he was carrying on his shoulders. See Annie. See how my son is so mean to me. He dramatically wept. Ma. King the little girl giggled at his antics. His pops was so immature sometimes. Annabeth patted his father on the head like one would a horse before turning to him. Zetsu. Don't be a jerk to Mr. Naruto. His father mouthed the same words to him, furthering the boy's annoyance. His father was a child. An immature little child. Whatever. What do you want, Pops? The man frowned. We'll have to discuss that lip of yours later. Before the son could retort, the man continued, but little Annie here asked you a question. You gotta stop daydreaming like that, my boy. Zetsu huffed. In annoyance before turning to the girl. He waited expectantly. Well, he finally asked her and she blushed in embarrassment. Oh yeah. I wanted to ask what you wanted to be. You know, like when you graduate school and stuff. Wait, why aren't you in school? Are you skipping? Zetsu held his head at the barrage of questions. Goddammit, this was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. Hell, why did his pops insist on taking these kids with them? They were demigods. As in related to the very beings Naruto claimed he wanted to avoid. Zetsu internally screamed in frustration. This was why he sometimes hated his father's good nature. Ahead of the trio, the two elder demigods were having their own hushed discussion. Are you sure you can trust them with Annie? Talia asked her companion with a frown. She didn't like the thought of leaving her surrogate little sister in the stranger's hands. Even if it had been a full week since they all met. I don't, but we have to play at sea. Luke answered before adding, and while I think it's still too early to trust them, they haven't shown themselves to have any ill intentions or monsters in disguise. You mean besides the ridiculous strength they seem to have? The raven-haired girl responded sarcastically. She didn't buy that bullshit about Mr. Whiskers being a black belt in multiple martial arts or his son being a prodigy. Black belts don't just punch through Cyclops, do they? The group had come across several monsters in their journey, all of which were very easily dispatched. If not by the Uzumakis, then by the elder demigods. But that wasn't the problem. However, the issue came with how both father and son were obviously hiding something. She couldn't help being suspicious. From pretending to be awed by how punching a hellhound's head clean off was, to how coincidental their first meeting had been. It all pointed to interference from their godly family and neither Talia nor Luke liked it. Both had suffered enough at the hand of the so-called benevolent Olympians. Luke lost his only family to a curse-induced madness and Talia lost her younger brother to her mother's selfishness and her father's rashness. Yeah, no. Both demigods simply wanted to get to Camp Half-Blood to have a safe haven against monsters. That, and maybe get to know other demigods. Misery loves company after all. But getting back on topic, the point was, Naruto and Zetsu were shady. Apparently, both were Japanese tourists on a vacation tour in the US. Which was surprising with how well they spoke English. No accent, no dragged sentences, nothing. It was like talking with any other American. Another surprising fact was how weird their dynamic was. Talia had no idea of how a functional family should act beyond what she'd seen on TV or in books. But their own family seemed like a stable one and at the same time, not so much. Mr. Whiskers for one acted more like the actual son of the pair. He was childish, happy-go-lucky, and made it a habit to constantly annoy his son with awful dad jokes. At least Annie seemed to like them. Hell, she seemed to have grown attached to the man pretty fast, going as far as to court like an average little girl around him. Talia wasn't sure she liked that. Sure, children usually could be instinctually observant about a person's true character, but the way Annie just latched onto the man worried her. And no, she wasn't jealous. Anyone that says otherwise would meet the sharp end of her spear. Zetsu was weird in his own way. If his dad had whiskers, the teen definitely had a cat's grumpy attitude down to a pat. She could excuse part of it for being a teenager, she was one too and knew how volatile she could get about the silliest of things. But the boy's face seemed stuck into either a scowl or a condescending smirk. Well, that wasn't completely true. She sometimes caught a small smile from him, especially when his dad started either fussing over him or bragged about him. There was also the fact he was smart. Maybe that's why he wasn't in school. All Mr. Whiskers said that Zetsu didn't need school anymore. Early graduation maybe. Or homeschooling. Whatever, she'd continue pondering on the many questions about the pair as she kept an eye on them. But she was sure of one thing, if the two turned out to be legit, then she'd stick around them. Maybe ask Mr. Whiskers for some pointers. Hey, having more power against monsters never hurt anybody. Luke was in a similar boat to Talia, although his thoughts were slightly darker. The teen did not trust the two strangers as far as he could throw them. Everything they did, from their meeting to their feats of strength, only seemed to validate his suspicions. Did his father send them? Or someone else? If so, then why? The Olympians already showed they couldn't give two shits about them. If they did, then his mother wouldn't be. Nope, not gonna venture down that road again, the boy thought, dismissing his dark thoughts before lightly glaring at the back of the blonde duo. He didn't care for the act the larger man was putting on, he wouldn't buy it. The eldest blonde just seemed too tough for a human, no matter what he said about training. He wasn't interested, he just wanted to get his two fellow demigods to safety for now. He'll think about his future then. Looking at the pair, he focused on the laughing Annie riding on Naruto's shoulder. He only agreed to let her do that because he wanted to keep things civil. He didn't know if the man was prone to anger if denied. He had plenty of experience with that type of people after all. He internally swore, regardless of his own weakness, Annie and Thals were practically family at this point, and if these two were to end up hurting them, he'll do his damn best to stop them. Annabeth liked Mr. Naruto. She knew she shouldn't, stranger danger, and all. But he saved her and her friends, plus there was just an air about him, it reminded her slightly of her own father, if even better. Mr. Naruto was really kind too and made lots of good food for her, even giving her piggyback and shoulder rides when she got tired from walking. It was weird that the two didn't have a car. But maybe they just liked camping. It felt like months since she's met the bigger blonde, even though she knew it's barely been 1 week. That might be due to just how much fun she's been having. The entire trip started to feel less like an escape and more like a family trip. Luke and Talia have become the siblings she's always wished to have, and even Zetsu was getting there. Even if he acted like a grumpy pants when Mr. Naruto told one of his funny jokes. He was smart though. Like crazy smart. Mr. Naruto said he was a prodigy or something, and Zetsu proved that by always answering the barrage of questions she's had to ask him. Even though he acted annoyed at first, he eventually answered her and sated her curiosity. She had told Mr. Naruto about how she wanted to grow up to be an architect, and the man laughed heartily. Architect Well, I hope you'll be ready for the challenges ahead. But you're a smart girl and I know you'll do it. Who knows? You might build the eighth wonder of the world one day. Yeah, Annabeth liked Mr. Naruto. He was a nice man. Even if he did react weirdly when she called him Mr. There wasn't much that Naruto had to complain about. Sure, this entire thing was risky, since avoiding the gods was the whole point in crafting their disguises. Zetsu had given him an earful some time ago about this. But come on, he couldn't leave these kids to their devices. If their parents were such asses that they couldn't be bothered with protecting their progeny, then that meant these kids probably wouldn't have lived long. He was the sole holder of the best father ever title, and he will die before he besmirches it by abandoning kids in need of help. Sure, the oldest blonde was a bit of an emo, and the older girl had a gleam in her eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of his old brother Sasuke whenever he saw a nice jutsu in the past. But you know what? These kids were alright. Especially little Annie. Why, if he had his way, the cutie would have become his official daughter from the day he met her. Too bad she insists on calling him Mr. Damn. Well, nothing he could do about it for now. Just gotta soldier on to that camp the kids kept whispering about. And maybe see if he could find some ramen around here, or maybe make it. He did spot a small field of wild foxtail millet a while back. Gyaran no Honkyochi, or the home of the Gao Lant, remains one of the greatest mysteries of history. One might call it the eastern version of Atlantis, a city lost to the sands of time. It was supposedly located in the middle of the East Sea, Mo. Saint, probably back when the latter was still a landmass, thus placing it at an age older than the Ice Age. What made this city special were its inhabitants. Found in the Japanese Kojiki, it was said to be a place for everyone and anyone to live. It presented one of the earliest examples of coexistence between creatures of different origins, as it is written to not have only housed humans, but monsters, demons, and other such fantastical creatures. On the other hand, ancient Taoist texts related to the Tao Te Ching through similar narration chains paint a vastly different picture of the mystical city. What was seen as a symbol of peace and understanding for the Shinto was abhorred as a symbol of rebellion against a divine decree by the Taoists. Nevertheless, despite their differences, both stories share the same ending: the complete destruction of Gyaran no Honkyochi. Because no ruins have ever been found, even at the bottom of the East Sea, most historians have considered this city as nothing more than a fairy tale. Excerpt from Legends and Wonders of the Far East, by Professor Amanda Perkins. National Building Museum, Washington, D.C., 30th of June 2000. Zetsu had many siblings over the centuries. They weren't blood siblings, of course, he never had any of those. His father, weirdly enough, simply never had any children by traditional means. He instead, either created them, as was his case, or simply took in children that caught his interest and raised them. They grew up, achieved their dreams and ambitions, and for some, were immortalized in legends. Amaterasu, the benevolent son. Maui, the brave adventurer. Quetzalcoatl, the radiant serpent. Anansi, the cunning spider. Miyamoto Musashi, the strongest samurai. These were but a few of his father's greatest children and students. Unfortunately, humans typically either exaggerated or twisted their feats and biography into something that was often unrecognizable from the original stories. But the point was, Naruto had a habit of taking in kids and having them join his family. So it came to no surprise to the green-haired Uzumaki that his father had taken an interest in yet another one. I just wish she was less talkative, Zetsu thought while glancing at Annabeth, the subject of his thoughts. The girl was holding onto Naruto's hand as she looked around in amazement at everything around her, and pointing at random structures and installations while firing off question after question. The tiny demi-goddess had made a passing comment upon seeing an advertisement for this museum a few days ago when they came into Washington. Upon hearing her wish, his pops had proceeded to reserve an expensive suite at one of the best hotels in the city, much to the amazement of Talia and Luke. Where did he get the money for it? Well, you tend to gather a substantial amount of riches once immortality truly sets in. But in any case, it has been almost a full month since they've met, and while Zetsu could see that why Talia and Luke still had some lingering doubts, they were being chipped down daily. The younger Uzumaki wasn't surprised. His father had that effect on people, his kindness and gentle nature could reach just about anyone, most of the time. Bah, there was no need for these thoughts right now, this was still a family vacation, extra company notwithstanding, so Zetsu would do his best to at least enjoy himself. Looking back at the girl, he wasn't surprised to see she'd had his father lift her up so she could take a closer look at one of the exhibits. And then the questions came back in a vengeance. Zetsu could understand her curiosity, he had once been just like her too, it didn't mean her non-stop badgering and the never-ending wave of inquiries were any less aggravating. He wanted to tell her off. But every time he held himself back for two reasons. His dad would be unhappy, as he seemed content to humor the kid. His dad also gave him a look from the side every time the man felt a spike in his negative emotions. So Zetsu kept his mouth shut on the matter, and instead opted to entertain himself with the other two, who seemed to be uninterested in the exhibits around them, instead to bicker on their new favorite subject, Pokemon. Naruto had the bright idea to introduce the two teens to pop culture through a couple of Game Boys he had in his bag, some old games he carried for him and Zetsu to play, and a few older mangas that he had discreetly unsealed. As expected with many in their age group, Luke and Talia took to video games like fish to water. Since his father was usually finishing off most monsters they encountered, with the exception of the times Talia would ask to leave some for them, they had more time to indulge themselves in games and fiction. Came down to their present hushed argument. I'm telling you Thals, Squirtle is the best starter. Luke had his arms crossed and a steely glare directed at the demi-goddess. And I'm telling you, Luke, that only an idiot would pick Squirtle over Charmander. Talia, ever the Spitfire, responded back with more heat. Squirtle breezes through the first two gyms, it gives you the best running start. Yeah, up until you get to mid-game and the fights start taking forever. Charmander might take a while to get used to, but that's only for bad players, Talia argued, her stormy eyes almost shining in frustration. Huh, remind me again who has the most badges. Luke smugly replied. You. Talia stammered, blushing in embarrassment before she crossed her arms, and turned her head away to pout. Charmander's a dragon. Dragons are cooler than turtles, enough said. She said. And how is this gonna help your gameplay? Squirtle at least gets the better evolution, Luke doubled down on her. Are you sure you've been playing the same game? The Ravenet snapped back. Bulbasaur, a voice interjected, making both teens whip their heads to its source. What? The answer came out of left field. So the two demigods were understandably aghast. I know what I said. Bulbasaur stomps all. Zetsu crossed his arms, with a smirk so condescending it wouldn't have been out of place on an Uchiha. The hell it does. The two teens spoke in tandem before turning to each other with fire in their eyes. Stop copying me. They spoke again, this time grabbing each other threateningly, while Zetsu watched in amusement. Stop it. Damn it. The two butted heads, and it looked like it was rapidly escalating towards a brawl. Zetsu didn't seem to care though. Hell, he wanted to see some chaos. His lips twitched into a rare smile. A genuine one, at the almost sibling-like moment. Hey, now to see if he could fan the flames more, they might get kicked out and finally do something fun. Oi! Zetsu froze at the word. He didn't dare turn for he knew the beast was behind him. The two arguing teens had a similar reaction, with Luke having a tight grip on Talia's forearms while she rammed top of her head into his torso in an attempt to push him back. All three gulped and turned to the sight of the elder Uzumaki, with an oblivious Annabeth standing next to him and still looking around. His voice wasn't loud, his eyes were closed, and a gentle smile was plastered on his face. Yet the sheer monstrous aura he exhibited showed the exact opposite of calmness. Luke and Talia had switched to holding onto each other for dear life while Zetsu unashamedly ran back behind them and hid. He wasn't above throwing people under the bus. Or in this case, the 18-wheeler that was his father when annoyed. Are you three trying to get us kicked out? He asked, smile still in place, although his question drew shivers down the troublemaker's spine. Talia tried to say. A pop-up. The man shushed her, come on guys. I believe we're still in a museum, let's all have some common decency. He said with a straight face. Annabeth looked up at him confused. The other three looked at each other. With Talia and Luke gaining cherry-like complexions, and Zetsu peeking out, his face stony. Really Pops. Now. The younger Uzumaki threw a disgusted look at his father, who flashed him a grin. Hey, don't pokey at my groove here. Zetsu groaned, while the two teens snapped out of their embarrassment, and snorted. Ew, who even says groove anymore? Talia asked with a smirk. Old men. That's who, Luke fired off with an equal amount of sass. While they didn't believe the man and his son were telling them everything, a month of traveling together had gone a long way in making them more comfortable around him. Naruto grabbed his chest, acting like he was shot. Annie, save me from the mean kids. The grown man crouched down behind the girl and used her as a makeshift shield. The youngest demi-goddess laughed in merriment at the group's antics. Olympus, Athena's temple. Athena narrowed her eyes, the twin pools of gray shined as millions of thoughts, ideas, and plans formed in her mind. Her hands blurred at superhuman speeds, taking down notes and organizing the mountains of documents she was reading through. There wasn't anything special about that. It was simply standard behavior for her within the confines of her own temple. In an effort to cope with the insane speed her mind worked at, she had developed a peculiar habit over the last few thousands of years of her existence. If anything caught her interest, no matter how small, she would mobilize that same speed to craft an unearthly detailed analysis of her target. Her latest target, in particular, was something she rarely encountered, an unknown variable. She had sensed him through her own daughter, a stranger, and his son, who appeared out of thin air and saved Annabeth and her friends. While Athena was grateful for the heroic act and would have likely left it at that, if not even blessed them for making her little Annabeth smile and laugh so much, she had instead witnessed, from the times she kept an eye on her daughter, the man and his son display an abnormal amount of strength over the past month. How very curious. She had thought the two to be demigods, or a demigod and a legacy, based on battle prowess alone. But that theory had been dispelled the second she had gotten a feel of their energy. While she might not be as good of a sensor as her sister, she could still proudly say that distinguishing a demigod among mortals was an easy feat. That was not the case here, however. The energy felt more akin to that of a nature spirit, a little more potent than that of a nymph or a satyr's. But that wasn't enough to raise any alarms. It was instead, the fact that both father and son were definitely male, and lacked a goat's distinct lower body, which in turn made the an outlier to both species she had initially thought of, and that detail made her so much more invested in their cases. After hearing their stories, a quick search on the Japanese census, surprisingly enough, showed information in line with what they revealed. Naruto N. Uzumaki and Zetsu N. Uzumaki, with no mention of a mother, curiously enough, were two Japanese citizens who came to the US on a travel visa. While the father was an ex-member of the JGSDF-1, and now a humble ramen cook, a waste of talents if you were to ask her, it was the son's biography that made her raise an eyebrow. IGH school graduate at the young age of 15. A prodigy in both sports and academics. How very odd. She was honestly intrigued. While there always was the occasional child genius, rare were those with an aptitude for both the mental and the physical work. But then again, if the Shinto were anything like them in that regard, then she could not dismiss the possibility of fraudulent information. Missed manipulation and all. What was their purpose here? Are they related to the Shinto? Servants, yokai, scouts. The piling amount of questions and the uncertainty of it all bothered the goddess of wisdom. She especially was not proud of the lack of information she had about the more elusive gods of the Japanese peninsula. Bringing up the piles of books and papers she had on the subject, she was sad. And to see the disparity between them and the literal mountains of different literary works she possessed on Western civilization. The gods of the East were different from them. They never had to adapt like the Greeks, Norse, or Egyptians to the modern world, by spreading their influence through demigods and subtly directing the progress of humanity in a manner that benefited both their respective domains and the well-being of mortals. They never had to work to spread their stories and to prevent themselves from fading. The Shinto, Taoists, and Hindus have retained a large part of their influence over the millennia. The Hindus, especially, have become ridiculously powerful due to the number of followers they had, so much so that the very notion of a war with them was tantamount to suicide in Athena's opinion. It was almost laughable. The only way they would have a chance at survival if beings like the Trimurti decided to step up to them, is in the unlikely case Zeus, Odin, and Ra-Man. Aged to put their egos aside and form a temporary alliance between their respective pantheons. Something that won't happen anytime soon, mused the goddess as her eyes roamed over the documents. As for the Taoists and Shinto, while their number of followers had noticeably decreased, many of their old shrines were still being used and many of their practices and traditions were maintained. Unfortunately, both of those parties had a rivalry going on that goes back thousands of years. This conflict had apparently started long before the Shinto chief goddess, Amaterasu Omikami, had earned her place at the top of her pantheon. The mysterious, heavenly war, was the trigger for it, and it was an event many scholars, god or mortal, wished to uncover more about. The two sides kept it under wraps, and all she had to go off of are apocryphal texts and unsettling rumors about it. The lack of valuable and concrete data only made ugly feelings of frustration bubble up in the goddess's being. She had many questions, many worries to be addressed, but could not do anything, both because of the ancient laws, and because she simply could not risk an interpantheonic war. Especially one with the Shinto. What they lacked in numbers to oppose the Greeks they more than made up in individual strength. Be it through their very own big three, Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo, or through this cryptid that she keeps reading tidbits of. A man rumored to have stood toe-to-toe with the Jade Emperor, one of the strongest beings even amongst the gods. As ridiculous as the last notion sounded, she could not help the gnawing feeling that there was more to this story. If in any way, it ended up being real, then that would mean the Olympians would have to face at least a pantheonic threat, and that wasn't a scenario she wanted to plan for. It all hinged on the question, just who was the gallant sage of the East? A question for another time, thought the goddess, hearing a chime from her office clock. And decided to move over to her other duties for now. She made a mental note to talk to her sister. Hopefully, Artemis can feel the two strangers out and give her a more accurate assessment of their threat level. She could not act rashly, nor illogically. After all, she is Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and battle strategy. She would not fail. Pops, what's that? Zetsu, now a few years old, tugged on his father's hair as he sat perched on his shoulders. That my dear boy is a baby, Naruto responded matter-of-factly. There was indeed a baby in the blonde's arms, and quite the odd one at that. Do all humans glow like that? The green-haired child asked. No, Zetsu-chan, they do not. The blonde nodded, very sure of himself. She's also very hot to the touch, he also noted, feeling a surprising amount of heat through his palms. The baby in question was quite the cute one, with a small pudgy face adorned with a small tuft of raven black hair. Her eyes were wide open and observing the sage curiously. Naruto himself was mesmerized by the beauty of her eyes, a pair of shining violets that could be compared to amethysts. Zetsu looked down at her with similar fascination, as his was the first human-like baby he'd ever seen. What is she then? He asked the obvious question, and Naruto, for one, was stumped. The sage had found the baby on the top of the Sunlight Mountain, named by the locals for the fact it was perpetually bathed by sunlight throughout the year. The little one had been crying her lungs out for hours before Naruto happened upon her. The baby, as if sensing the man's warm aura, had immediately quieted down. Naruto knew what she was. He had met beings like her before, and her energy signature was quite similar to the people like Kagutsuchi or the Shinigami. This was a Shinto goddess. Well, that posed an issue. He still wanted some peace, for now, to see Zetsu grow up and explore more of Yamato and the surrounding regions with his little boy. He did not want to involve himself in some petty polit. The baby whimpered as if sensing the man's hesitance. The decision was almost instinctive. Screw it. He'd just have to adjust his plan to fit an extra passenger. As he looked once again at the little girl, he raised her up so she was at eye level with Zetsu. The babe reached out with her small arms, curiously making grabbing motions towards the short immortal. Naruto gave his son his answer. She's your new sister, he said with a smile while Zetsu titled his head in confusion. Zetsu-chan, meet Amaterasu-chan, the father said softly. Everything about her reminded him of his late best friend's technique. Flames as black as her hair, ones that could provide both warmth or burn anything to nothingness. This little one had a lot of potential. He could feel it. The baby who had been silent up until that point started babbling excitedly and reaching out for Naruto's face. Naruto smiled and let the girl pat his whiskered cheeks. His family was growing. When the sun met the sage. Tuckahoe State Park, Maryland, 23rd of July 2000. Artemis overlooked the diligent and coordinated work of her huntresses. The young ladies clad in the hunt's signature silver parkas were setting up camp for the night. They were divided into groups of 3 to hoist the tents, prepare the fire pit, and skin their bounty for the night. The goddess of tea. Hunt smiled warmly at the sight of her girls. They've been working hard lately, she thought, pondering on how to reward them for their perseverance. Maybe I could ask Aunt Hestia for a batch of cookies. She almost salivated at the thought. Mine lady, a voice interrupted her musings, as she looked to the side, spotting a kneeling young woman. Her lieutenant, sister-in-arms, and best friend, Zoe Nightshade had her head bowed. Her braided hair was adorned with a silver circlet that glowed in the moonlight. What is it, Zoe? Artemis asked. I never mean to question thy judgment, ye. Ere thou knowest this entire trip was behoveful. The dusky-skinned huntress did not rise from her bow. Artemis cocked an eyebrow but felt no offense at Zoe's question, rather, she was more miffed. The fact the nymph still acted so professional with her even thousands of years into their friendship. And yes, the Shakespeare speech was not helping matters. Well, it's both a favor for my sister and an opportunity to test these mortals. They have 2 young maidens in their group last I heard, the goddess answered. Zoe blinked up at her in surprise, before her coal-black eyes narrowed in anger. Are they hurting them? She hissed out. This time, Artemis narrowed her eyes in thought. From what I've seen from my chariot, it doesn't look like it. If anything, it's the very opposite. How so? Now it was the nymph's turn to be surprised. The goddess proceeded to explain to her how she had occasionally watched over the group at night as they journeyed through the East Coast. She'd seen how the only adult in the group guided them and helped them build a makeshift campsite for the nights they spent in the wilderness. She'd also gotten a faint feel of his and his son's energy. The blonde man was indeed a strange one, as Athena had said. It's like looking at a satyr without goat legs, the goddess explained as best as she could. He just has that feel to him. And thou art positive he's not dangerous? Asked Zoe skeptically. That's what I intend to find out tonight, the goddess answered simply. Making camp in this particular park tonight hadn't been a coincidence. From her vantage point on her chariot, Artemis had seen and heard many of the group's interactions, including their destination. While they obviously did not know where Camp Half-Blood was, they knew it was somewhere along the East Coast. Thus she had predicted their route and made sure to meet them at her leisure. Both to see if she could get 2 huntresses out of it and to scrutinize the males, and if necessary, either kill them or turn them into jackalopes. Decisions. Naruto led the group into the park. Over the last month, he had been able to sense more than one pair of eyes watching them, following their movements. However, the observers never made any aggressive moves, so he held his hand and silently accepted Zetsu's constant, I told you so, Damn, why did his son have to be so petty? Yes, he took in a gaggle of demigods, and yes, he might have unwillingly attracted the attention of the Greek gods, thus making their mission many times more difficult, but you know what? Yeah, no, he had nothing. Zetsu was right to be mad, but that didn't mean he could hate on the kids for their victims here. His boy was not as empathetic as he was, and unfortunately, that seemed to be something innate to him. Zetsu just didn't care enough about a lot of things, living or not, that wasn't immediate family. Oh sure, he could warm up to people, but that usually took years. The 3 demigods trudged behind him, as he continued to lead them in the direction of whoever was observing them. It wasn't like he was changing the direction of his travels. Camping in that park had been within his plans since he entered the state and heard of it. On the contrary, going somewhere else would have alerted their spectators to his or Zetsu's sensing ability. He couldn't afford to screw this up more than he did. He was sure his son was at the tip of his rope with him. This is so troublesome, the man thought, unknowingly channeling his inner Shikamaru. Being the best father ever was hard work. He had to set an example, as well as make sure his kids were happy. Over the years he'd come to find that, more often than not, these two things tended to be mutually exclusive. Snap. Much like an alert deer, Naruto snapped out of his thoughts and perked up at the sound of rustling bushes around the group. Zetsu stopped next to him while Talia and Luke had already taken defensive positions around Annabeth. The little blonde tried to make herself look bigger by puffing her chest up and holding up a bronze dagger given to her by Luke. "Oh, that's adorable," the sage internally cooed at the little girl trying to look intimidating, and he fought the urge to take her picture. Before he could do that, however, about a dozen young girls wearing silver parkas and wielding hunting bows peeked out from the trees with the weapons trained on the group. A cloaked girl with chestnut-color hair and hypnotizing silver eyes was at the head of the group. To anyone else, it would look like a group of young adolescents being led by a girl their own age, if not younger. "Halt, mortals," the girl's voice was cold and commanding. Naruto was about to greet them, but before he could get a word in edgewise, someone beat him to the punch. "Huh, who are you?" Talia quickly trained her spear on the brunette. Her action was apparently a faux pas, as every other archer adopted a fierce expression, and trained their bows on her. The one to voice their thoughts, however, was a young lady wearing a silver circlet. "How dare thou point thy weapon at Lady Artemis?" The girl barked at them before the apparent leader held their hand up. "Zoe, calm down, it's a common mistake," the goddess in question interjected, making the girls reluctantly lower their weapons. Luke, seemingly understanding the situation first, elbowed Talia and hissed at her to drop her weapon. Naruto was confused a little about the situation. While he had felt the leader's power and quickly singled her out as a goddess, her willingness to cause misunderstandings by turning into a young girl baffled him. And that other girl, is she talking like she's in medieval England? The sage thought while scratching his head. All in all, entire group's mannerisms were pretty quirky. But then again, quirky was far from bad, and it made things more fun. Naruto smiled and raised his hands in a gesture of non-violence as he attempted to pacify the situation. "Ah, hello there young ladies," he tried but was rudely interrupted. "Silence boy, do not think you can address me so casually," the goddess rebuked him. Naruto blinked at her behavior. Especially at the way she talked to him. "Huh, what's with these trashy manners?" He narrowed his eyes briefly. For a second there, he considered responding with something witty, maybe something like, "What's with this sassy lost child?" Naruto would then point at her while looking at everyone else. She'd get angry, maybe shoot him with her arrows or a curse, and he'd respond as civilly as possible by punting her across the country. Ellipsis. "Yeah no, doing that will be opening a can of whoop-ass." The sage nodded to himself at his wisdom. He would not kick the child. Unless he wanted to burn own the entire state in the ensuing fight with her family, he had to accept her attitude, for now. So, reluctantly, he swallowed his pride and smiled pleasantly at the huntresses. Even though he wished to grab the goddess by the ear and teach her some common courtesy. Later, Artemis sat in her tent in her adult form whilst deep in thought. The travelers had been separated, with the girls being taken by her huntresses despite their protests to be checked for injuries, and the males being isolated to a clearing outside the camp, with clear instructions not to approach the tents, or else the girls would be brought before her in a few minutes, to both ask them questions and make her offer of joining the hunt for them. While Artemis wouldn't say it, she secretly wished the man would have taken offense or even tried something. It would have given her a quick excuse to turn him into a jackalope. But no, as if he knew what was at stake, the man and his son, surprisingly enough, did not so much as throw a glare in her direction. Yes, she taunted them, and yes, she might have also acted in a way that would have earned her a lecture by her aunt, but she also had ample justification for it. The oldest male was too odd. Too strange for her tastes. While he did look surprised at their arrival, he also did not look intimidated in the least. She had felt his level of power, and needless to say, it was far from impressive. A little more power than the average nature spirit maybe, but nothing to ring alarm bells about. Could he somehow be suppressing his aura? The goddess thought, before hurriedly scratching out that option. No, nothing could hide from her senses. While she did not possess her brother's foresight, her other senses were the finest among the Olympians. So much so that she often, as her brother put it, nerfed herself so she can enjoy life with a bit more challenges. Something these same senses allowed her to do was to assess the threat level of pretty much any creature. And yet, these same senses indicated nothing threatening about the blonde, even though Athena's warnings said the opposite. She wouldn't admit it, but she felt quite miffed at how unaffected he and his son were by her aura. He was polite but not out of fear, civil but not cowed, despite the large gap in power. That contradictory behavior confused her all the more, and she could only arrive at two possible conclusions. Either the man was an unpredictable wild card, or he was an idiot. She concentrated a little on the part of her driving her chariot. It was the same ability her brother used to tty much see any and everything under the light of his own chariot. A scene formed in her mind's eye, one where the three males sat around a small campfire of their own and had a conversation of their own. She did, surprisingly enough, notice a brief tenseness in the father and son's posture before both relaxed and continued their discussion. Can they sense me too? The goddess asked herself. She saw the man start making funny faces, excitable movements, and steer the conversation in a direction which visibly relaxed the blonde demigod. So not an idiot, but still, as harmless as he was, he's definitely hiding something. Artemis nodded to herself. Just as she finished her thoughts, her tense flaps were pried open as Zoe entered, followed by the two demigoddesses. She scrutinized the two girls. While one was obviously upset at her huntress's maybe, the other, younger one, was looking around in childish awe. Artemis smiled warmly at the sight. While it was true that the hunt and the moon were her primary domains, one must not forget that she was also the patron goddess of children and maidens. So occupied with the girls was she, that she never noticed a small black worm-like creature slithering from under the bottom of Talia's shoe and seemingly camouflaging itself with the carpet. The two demi-goddesses had spent the night with the hunt, while the males camped outside. The two girls returned in the morning, with Talia somehow having a more pronounced resting bitch face than Zetsu himself had, and Annabeth running excitedly to Naruto's figure to tell him all the details of her night. The younger Uzumaki was honestly reaching his patience's limit with all the bullshit that recently happened. He knew taking in the three brats was a bad idea, and he should have protested more to the idea. Then again, his pops was even more stubborn than a mule, so that would be a worthless endeavor. So, unbeknownst to his father, Zetsu had let go of a small part of himself and let it attach itself to Talia so it can sneakily infiltrate the tent. Much like his own father, Zetsu could clone himself. Unlike the sage, however, he could also asexually reproduce, or at least, make more bodies, whose mind could be both independent or linked to his. They also had his ability of complete suppression, something that not even his own father could replicate. They were the perfect spies, unseen, unheard, and very much loyal to him. He knew he was taking a risk with this, but after all the idiocy his father pulled, yeah, he was entitled to some safeguards. If the Olympians wanted to play, then Zetsu was about to pull out an Uno reverse card on them. When Uzumakis played, they played to win. Naruto looked at the old man seated in front of him with a glare. The geezer was grinning at him, not at all affected by his stare. Naruto scowled and looked at the objects in front of him. How many can I choose? For who are fightin'? As much as ye can handle, brat. The old man grinned at him. You realize I'm older than you, Kagutsuchi? Naruto huffed at the Shinto god of smithing, who just grinned in response before he reluctantly started putting the different accessories on. Ellipsis. Mara, the evil one, sat upon his throne of skulls as he smirked to himself. Truly, his plan had worked out without a hitch. While the Trimurti and other gods were busy with the monstrosities and curses he unleashed, he would move his other troops forward towards the eastern coast. He did, however, have to deal with one last annoyance before he could declare his victory. Just as he finished that thought, the giant iron doors to his throne room were blasted open by a powerful kick. Mara rolled his shoulders and prepared himself for one of the best fights of his life. His esteemed guest had arrived. He smirked to himself. So you've finally arrived. The being paused in surprise. What the hell are you wearing? An embarrassed Naruto speed walked into the room, somehow dressed less fashionably than a circus clown, with an assortment of divine artifacts and cloths to boost his power. It's my ass-kicking outfit. Bitch, hollered the sage. A younger immortal's silly memory. Leeds Point, Southern New Jersey. 2nd of September 2000. Luke was honestly having a great time. Something that would have surprised anyone that knew him, seeing as according to Talia, he was edgier than her spear. Ellipsis. Well okay, then Ms. Tsunere, he only knew what that word meant because of the two tourists. So he was happy. And how could he not? After that fateful night in the woods almost a month ago, TTY much all of his doubts about his new family had disappeared. When he had been told to stand aside while a goddess spoke to, and possibly took away his companions, he had honestly felt an immeasurable amount of despair. He hadn't had a nice childhood, not with his mother's fits and deteriorating mental health. That's not to mention his deadbeat of a father who, even as a so-called, omnipotent, god, could not seem to make time for his kid or the woman he loved. Or that's what his mother claimed whenever the subject was brought up. Point was, he had honestly been at his lowest during that night, but something that Mr. Naruto, or Mr. Whiskers as he and Talia had taken to calling him, had said had given him a small inkling of hope. Hey, what's that frown for buddy? You don't seriously think that low of our friends do ya? The man had continued to say how he was sure the girls would return, that the battles and good times they had spent together had forged an unbreakable bond between all five of them. Yes, 5. Maybe it was during these couple of days they had spent on the beach before taking a boat to come to New Jersey, but at some point during the trip, the blonde demigod had felt his worries slowly ebb away and had truly started to enjoy his time in the group. Mr. Whiskers' bad jokes, Zetsu's over-the-top reactions to them, Talia's snark and attitude, and Annabeth's childish cheer. And yeah, maybe his edgy self too. Everyone had their quirks, but everyone also had the others back. Mr. Whiskers had become the fun uncle, he'd go so far as to call him the group's dad. Zetsu was the stick-in-the-mud older brother, Annabeth was their adorable little sister, and Talia, yeah, he had some conflicting feelings there. Oh, don't get him wrong, he certainly loved her. But he wasn't so sure this love was platonic anymore. Maybe it was just puberty jumbling up his feelings, or maybe he really did find a girl with freckles to be cute. Ellipsis. He'll ponder on these feelings later on. Growl. After they had dinner, that is. Damn, how long until they reach a restow? Luke yelped as he bumped into something. Naruto was in a good mood too, things have been looking up ever since that bratty goddess had tried, and failed, to separate them. As if Lil, Annie and Talia would just jump ship like that. He was still irritated at the way she treated him. So much so that he had half a mind to march up to her parents, Zeus and some lady called Leto, go figure, and give them a stern talking to. Because the girl's attitude screamed, spoiled, and while part of it might be the goddess's own fault for refusing to grow up over her time among mortals, most of the blame usually falls on the parents' shoulders for failing to rear their child properly. If anything, with what he read about the girl's story, maybe it wasn't surprising she grew up like that. Being the product of an extramarital affair, having the stepmother out to get her and her mother. And apparently, and that last fact genuinely shocked Naruto to the core, having her own dad tell her about her own conception in detail. Zeus boyo, if I ever see you, you're getting an ass beating. Out of principle, the sage internally swore. Then again, that might not be an option, seeing as it would contradict his entire objective for being here, and there was no guarantee the story was real. But if it turned out to be real, and he and Zeus, coincidentally, found themselves in a remote enough place. Ohahohu. He'll be throwing out so many hands he might as well call himself Hashirama. Ellipsis. Growl. Hungry again. Damn it. He knew he should have eaten that extra bowl. Naruto was startled when he heard Luke yelp in surprise and the sound of something breaking on impact with the ground. Turning around, he saw Luke on his behind while a statue lay on the ground in pieces. Luke, are you alright, my boy? The elder Uzumaki strode towards him and helped him up. What's wrong, Makej? Got your head in the clouds. Talia was clearly not one to miss an opportunity for teasing. Oh, you'd know all about that, wouldn't you? Luke snapped back before he looked at whatever he hit. Naruto did the same. Fuck, the man thought. The statue was ridiculously detailed, to the point it almost looked real. This is gonna be so expensive, he inwardly cried looking at the statue, the work P. Into it was so detailed that the father could only assume it'd be worth tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. Yes, he had tons of money, but that didn't mean he liked to throw it haphazardly. Naruto ignored the two demigods bickering, while Annabeth stood by Zetsu looking at the scene worriedly. He knelt down to inspect the destroyed stone to see if he could patch it up with some basic earth release and leave without being seen. He'll bullshit an excuse to the kids later. That plan was thrown to the grinder, however, the moment his fingers made contact with the stone. Naruto almost recoiled in surprise. This isn't a statue. The man's eyes had unknowingly shifted to a golden color as he detected the trace amount of natural energy emanating from the stone. This was a corpse, a petrified human corpse. Someone that was exposed to a raw amount of natural energy and turned to stone as a result. He wouldn't call it senjutsu, but something close. A sudden spike of negative emotions alerted him to someone's presence. "Oh my. Hello there," a feminine voice called out, making the group turn towards her. The woman before them looked Middle Eastern and was clad in a dark robe, a headscarf, and a pair of sunglasses. There wasn't much else to describe her. Even with the shades on, Naruto could tell the woman was observing them. The sage noticed her emotions darken considerably when her gaze swept over Annabeth. That's a lot of anger. A quick scan of her energy confirmed the man's suspicions. A monster. More specifically, the one likely responsible for the poor sod's unfortunate end. When I heard the sound of one of my pieces breaking, I thought for sure another bear had gotten on the property, but thank goodness it wasn't the case, the woman said, ignorant of Naruto's thoughts and the kids' apprehensive stares. They evidently had a hard time trusting strangers for obvious reasons. Just as Talia and Luke opened their mouths to speak, Zetsu interjected with his hands raised. "We're sorry for the trouble, ma'am. We'll pay you back for the statue," the younger Uzumaki started with a placating tone while he looked at his father from the side. Good, Naruto thought. Zetsu had caught on to the woman's nature. "Oh, that old thing. There's no need for that," the woman waved her arm dismissively, something that made Naruto's anger rise. Although he refused to show any outward reaction and opted to keep a blank look. "I'd much rather you join me for some supper. I rarely get visitors around these parts," the lady said, before gesturing to her home, a large building built like a cabin. The sign on the front read, Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. Luke and Talia's stomachs instinctively growled, making the two blush in embarrassment. Annabeth walked up to Naruto with a worried expression and tugged on his shirt. "Huh, oh Annie," he patted the girl's head. "You guys go on ahead, I'm going after you in a bit," he called out to the rest before looking at Zetsu. The boy met his eye and nodded. Understanding the wordless message. "Engage if you must, but try to wait for me." The group filtered into the house, with the demigods thanking the woman for her generosity. And Zetsu standing between them and the monster. The sage waited a few moments until he was sure no eyes were on him, before he slapped the ground next to him. The stone piece shifted and sank into the ground, which had suddenly gained a muddy texture. They soon disappeared and a small stone rose from the edge. It was a grave. The man knelt before it, clasped his hands, and muttered a quick prayer. "It's not much, but it's the least I could do," he thought melancholically. Due to his proficiency in the sage arts and his previous connection to his sworn siblings, Naruto had become as close to an empath as anyone could get. That ability alone had largely shifted his perspective on the world around him. He had over the years become someone who cherished life and did not tolerate any disrespect towards it. He rarely killed for anything other than nourishment, and if he did, he made sure his enemies received a proper burial. No sane person wanted or deserved their remains to be paraded around. Like a trophy or left at the mercy of the elements. Despite his power, he believed every sentient creature had the right to live its life as it wished and die as it wished. It was an overly idealistic belief. He knew that much since the world was never that kind. But if he could preserve someone's dignity when it was tarnished, he would do so without a second thought. There was simply no reason not to. The blonde got up from his position and looked around at the rest of the statues. "Don't worry guys, I'll be back for you, just gotta scold somebody first." He walked towards the building with a determined expression. The man entered the emporium and saw the rest of his companions seated on a table in a corner of the main room. Looking around at the various pieces being displayed, he couldn't help but be impressed. Monster or not, That lady had some good taste in art. Now if only she had the decency to refrain from callous murder and it not desecrate the dead, that'd be great. Mr. Naruto. The lady is really great. She's making us burgers. Annabeth, ever the excitable child, was bouncing in her seat. He wouldn't fault her, hamburgers were apparently a meal that kids just universally liked. Even Talia, who was normally all about being cool, couldn't help the slight bounce of anticipation. Burgers being her favorite and all. Luke and Zetsu for their part were deep in a conversation of their own, with the blonde demigod seemingly arguing a point that Zetsu took great satisfaction in rebuking. The father smiled at the kids. Well then, I'll just have to go and thank her, won't I? He waved at them and continued towards a side room, probably the kitchen, where sounds of utensils being moved resonated. The woman had been in the middle of preparing a burger patty when she heard the door of the kitchen open, then close behind her. She turned around in surprise and saw the blonde man enter the room, a bright smile on his face. She put up a fake smile and looked at the man. "Oh, sir. How may I help you?" "Ah, no need for the sir. Just call me Naruto. I just came here to thank you for your generosity, and offer my help." The blonde rubbed his hands together and approached her. "Oh, there's no need for that, Mr. Naruto. You are guests here." The woman's smile strained a bit as she waved her hand at the man, shooing him off. "Oh, but I mustard insist. Can't let a lady cook all by her lonesome. My mind simply wouldn't be at cheese." A small snort escaped the woman before she daintily covered her mouth with a hand. "Oh, you got jokes, do you?" Despite her hand, Naruto could tell the woman was smiling genuinely. "You better believe it," the man winked with a grin. This time, a giggle escaped the robed woman before she scooted over and gestured for Naruto to come to help her. A few minutes passed in silence between them, with Naruto chopping up vegetables while his host continued preparing the patties. Deciding he's had enough fun, the sage finally decided to end the pleasantries. "So you make kids' meals often?" The sage once again kidded, although the woman did not seem to catch it. "Oh no, people rarely come in these parts, let alone children." She spoke, seemingly sad. "Really? With all those statues outside, you must truly be making a killing." This time the woman looked at him sharply, her brows visibly narrowing. Medusa was suddenly very alert. The emphasis on the last word did not escape her. She backed up a short distance and looked at the man, only to feel a chill crawl up her spine at the absolutely bone-chilling smile he was giving her. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return outside." She cursed herself for stuttering in front of a mortal. She was Medusa, damn it. She steeled herself and raised her hand to her sunglasses. The man didn't flinch. His face, which was stretched in a mirthful grin moments earlier, had been replaced by a grim visage that spelled something foreboding for her. He knew. He saw right through her act, her fake smile, her trap. But it wouldn't matter. He wasn't the first to do so, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. All she had to do was petrify him, and do the same for the others. Especially the little one. She could smell Athena's stench wafting off her. "You know, I can forgive a lot of things in life," the man asked her, as he washed his hands. "But targeting kids is a big no-no, ya know." His frigid smile stayed on his face. His tone remained cheerful despite the serious nature of his words. Medusa shook off her shock and raised a hand to her sunglasses. What was she afraid of after all? One look and the problem would be solved. She slowly sashayed towards him, like a predator approaching prey. "Oh, and whatever do you mean?" While her tone was innocent, her smile was anything but. "I'm just as simple," she continued. Only to be interrupted. "Cut the bullshit, will ya?" The blonde father's voice froze her in her tracks. He approached her as well, until he stood face to face with her, whilst still looking into her lenses. She wouldn't falter, not now. "Oh. And who might you be, Ak?" The woman choked as a powerful hand lifted her off the ground by the throat. "I'm just the guy looking after these kids," he replied. Looking up at her struggling form. She ripped her glasses and scarf off of her head in response, exposing her face and hair to the world. "Die," she croaked and looked into the man's eyes. Her own pair glowed as her curse activated itself. ... And nothing happened. "What?" she internally screeched, narrowed her eyes, and opened them wide, gazing once again into her aggressor's own. ... And once more. Nothing happened. Impossible. Her slit eyes flashed many times. Is he really mortal? The snakes making up her hair struck the man's arm and injected as much venom as they could into his veins. The man raised an eyebrow and his lips slowly formed a smirk. "That's a nifty trick you got there, were you going to use it on the kids?" He asked but received no answer, as the woman's face started to turn blue. Seeing this, he blinked owlishly then abruptly dropped her, and she collapsed to her knees to take in some much-needed air. The man rubbed the back of his neck and looked at her sheepishly. "Air. Sorry about that. Why you? Who are you? What are you?" She panicked and crawled back until she hit one of the closets. The man, who up until now had looked like he would end her, suddenly did a 180 and grinned at her. "I already told ya, didn't I? I'm looking after these kids." He thumped his chest with his knuckles. "Can't let you turn them into an art exhibit, ya know. That's just not cool." She glared at him with as much hate as she could muster. "He's toying with me, bastard." She was fuming. Call her pretentious, but she was used to her opponents seeing her as a threat. Even the more powerful demigods she'd slain had the decency to look alarmed when she'd pulled out her claws. Then again, with how he resisted her curse and venom, he might be someone with a god in his corner. Naruto looked down at her and pouted. "Bah, he'll indulge her a bit. Fine, call me Naruto Uzumaki." He paused and looked at her for her turn. When she kept giving him a nasty look, he extended a hand towards her. "And, what's your name, lady?" he said with the same expectant tone. She kept glaring at him. "Stop screwing with me," she finally said. He tilted his head to the side. Her negative emotions, which had already been practically pouring off of her, exploded like a geyser. Rage and malice were on the forefront, but behind all that, the tiniest traces of sadness, grief, and guilt. Why would she? Naruto wanted to slap himself for missing the obvious clues. Snake hair, stone statues, glowing eyes. Damn, Zetsu was gonna scold him for being such an idiot. "Stop fucking with me," said snake-haired monster screamed, snapping the man out of his thoughts. Right, air mimosa or something, he thought, quite sure of himself. "Are you a god? A monster? What are you?" She screamed at him with her eyes glowing a sulfuric yellow. She got screwed over, didn't she? Or at least that's what the book Zetsu gave me said. Naruto ignored the monster's Inc.'s screaming in favor of his own thoughts. "If you want to kill me, just do it. Don't play with me like a toy." Her face was flushed with anger as she flashed her claws at him, and got into a crouching position. He finally brought his attention back to the situation and chose the most appropriate response he could think of. "I'm sorry, did you say something?" he said with the most aloof tone he could muster. He couldn't help being a troll even in these situations. Kakashi-sensei would have been proud. "Raahhhhhh," the woman roared, and much like an animal, she reared back her claws and pounced on him. He raised an eyebrow at her action, and just as she reached him, he raised a hand in front of her face and flicked her. Crack! The sound of bone being crunched echoed out as her momentum was all but reversed. She flew back to the opposing wall, knocking over shelves and kitchen utensils and causing a cacophony of noise. The monster remained on the ground, surrounded by broken plates, cups, and other objects. With her nose almost torn off from the force of his attack, Medusa had almost blacked out. The blow, as insignificant as it looked, held a Herculean amount of strength. Naruto approached her with a steady gait and then crouched in front of her quivering form. "Sit up for a bit," he said, and she obeyed, albeit trembling. If one were to look at her now, they'd be surprised to see the monster acting like a scared puppy, for she was now aware of the sheer difference in power between her and that thing. "He's not human. He can't be." She shook in fright. The man, against all odds, sat down on the dirty ground in front of her and looked into her eyes. He smiled at her, this time with a gentle look in his eyes before he raised a hand to her cheek. She froze at the contact. For a wave of warmth filled her and she felt her nose shift painlessly, readjusting, restitching, and healing itself. "What's your story?" the father asked her softly. She gazed at him with eyes half-lidded from the relaxing feeling. "You mean you don't know about me, Medusa?" she asked hesitantly, as all the fight had left her. "Oh, I do. I read about you before." He paused and winked at her. "But see, I'd like to hear it from the source." The snake-haired woman was silent for a while, contemplating his words, before she shook her head and looked at him resolutely. Could you just kill me please? Whatever game you're playing, I want no part of it. She hated being treated like a doll. It's all she ever was before. Her dark musings were interrupted by the man's hum. Then how about a trade? He grinned toothily and held up his fist towards her. I'll tell you about me if you do the same. Sound good? He elaborated and nudged his hand towards her. Here, boop it, he said, and she raised an eyebrow at the confusing gesture. What? The monster blinked, utterly lost. Boop it, he repeated, grinning like a loon. She tentatively raised her fist and approached his own. They bumped. And suddenly, she understood. She understood everything about him. His past, his motivations, his actions, his feelings. Everything was unveiled for her and she felt breathless. She almost gasped. Several memories played in her mind, both happy and sad ones. How could someone like that exist? If she were to compare it, she'd say it was like being bathed in a ray of sunshine, warm and comforting. How was his soul so pure? She looked up at him and was flabbergasted at the sight before her. He's crying. Naruto's lips were fixed in a tight smile while tears wetted his whiskered cheeks. He finally looked at her. And she received the shock of her life when she felt him envelop her in an embrace. You really went through a lot, huh? You poor thing. His words struck a chord within her. She stood there, frozen. Unable to react as a normal person would to the gesture. How long had it been? How long had it been since she'd received such a gentle touch from anyone? Since she'd received any form of comfort. She'd been betrayed by the love of her life, then by her own patron, then by the entirety of humanity, as she became something to hunt down and exterminate. A monster to be hated and abhorred. She had long since snapped and abandoned her humanity, done unspeakable things over the years, both in the name of survival and vindictive pleasure. She did not deserve this. None of this. They sat together in silence. The man holding her while she stared blankly in front of her. Why are you doing this? She whispered as the man held her tightly. The remainder of what she saw. When she bumped her fist to his nod at her. She caught a glimpse of his true identity, of his power. There was nothing for him to gain from this charade. He could have erased her very existence. Sent her to oblivion 1,000 times over. But she'd also caught glimpses of his true self. A warrior, a philosopher, a jokester, a ramen addict, but especially, a father, a man filled with love and kindness. Naruto N. Uzumaki never gave up on people, no matter who or what they were. I'm a monster, I killed countless people, she protested weakly, even as she internally knew what his answer would be. But she still needed to hear it. Her worries won't rest until she hears him speak. Naruto let go of the embrace, and held her by the shoulders, looking directly into her slit eyes. His eyes, it's like gazing into the sun. You've gazed into my soul and I've done the same. Medusa, your humanity is still there. If it wasn't, then your heart wouldn't carry all these deaths like a burden. Shish. He raised her hands to her mouth to hide her choked gasp. Her eyes were closed and yet, tears flooded out of them. Lives that have been lost can never be recovered, but if you're willing to change, I will stand by your side and help you. Help you start over, he said and squeezed her shoulders firmly. This time, as Naruto hugged her again, she tentatively raised her arms to his back and squeezed. Medusa wept in the arms of a stranger. As all the guilt, the frustration, and the emotions she had bottled for her entire existence as a monster burst forth. For the first time in eons, someone had allies seen her as something other than a despicable monster. Someone had seen a woman who lost her way. Is that it? The fabled home of the gallant. The Jade Emperor muttered, unimpressed with the sight below him. He floated in the sky alongside another man, this one noticeably happier. Well, I didn't choose the name. But I can't help but blush when I hear it, hee. A blond man rubbed his head while his cheeks colored in embarrassment. His dear followers had decided to honor him that way. The red-haired deity remained silent. Well, do you like it? Look how hard everyone is working. The blonde urged and waved his hand at the hustle and bustle of various creatures, all going about their daily lives. The city itself was not glamorous, it could even be called a large village. The houses, however, all had their unique style and architecture, showcasing both the diversity of the residents and their creativity. The god opted to stare at the city emotionlessly. Okwang, I'd like to formally welcome you to my city. This is a place in which everyone is welcome. human, spirit, yokai, and even you guys. All are welcome to sit and dine on the same table. The man continued, heedless of the god's thoughts. Even as he detected a steadily rising amount of negativity within him. Quote. Oh, speaking of dinner, would you like to join us for tonight? We're having a banquet to celebrate the news of the alliance. Quote. Okwang, you okay there? The sage poked the redhead with a finger, only for his hand to be slapped by the deity. I was wrong about you, Okwang said, his voice cold. Huh. Naruto was genuinely confused, but before he could ask for clarification, his guest continued. You might have been born mortal, but I was willing to give you a chance to become one of us. I was even going to extend the same courtesy to these siblings of yours. The man's third eye opened itself as he spoke to the sage, his gaze never turning away from the city, even as his lips curled in disgust. But this, a city that equates maggots to gods. Are you really that willing to insult us? The Jade Emperor finally shifted his gaze towards the sage, his third eye glowing. Naruto's eyes widened at the accusation, and he began waving his hands in front of him in panic. Oi. Okwang, calm down. This isn't what I want. No, this city has no right to exist. It goes against all we stand for. The deity shouted as his body began to glow along with his eye. Purity, power, prestige. All of these belong to those chosen to stand above the rest like us. Fraternizing with lower insects. Don't make me laugh. The redhead was flailing his arms whilst giving his speech, the man's words bordering on fanaticism. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight before he hurriedly floated between his guest and the city. Okwang, do you understand what you're saying? His shout attracted the attention of the various creatures below, who all started to wave excitedly. I do. If you are so willing to make a fool of us, then I will show you the error of your ways. The Jade Emperor yelled before he raised a hand to the sky and brought it down. Suddenly, day became night. Naruto's eyes widened in alarm. For rocketing towards the earth, was a gigantic meteor. Consider this. A declaration of war. The Jade Emperor shouted. Prologue to war. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 2nd of September 2000. Can I really change? Medusa's lips quivered as she uttered the question meekly. She was still draped in Naruto's arms, with the man soothingly rubbing her back in an attempt to calm her down. After a few minutes of silence, the sage finally spoke up. Medusa, do you understand how many lives you've taken? The woman flinched. His tone, although gentle, did not carry any warmth within it. These people, each and every single one of them was an individual with dreams and aspirations of their own. Medusa gripped the man's back at his words. They each had either families or loved ones. Loved ones that will probably never forgive you and carry their hatred for you even when they've left this world. The woman's tears were dripping down her cheeks as she hiccuped. Naruto had expected this reaction. Although his words were harsh, it was a truth that the woman needed to hear. I'm telling you this so you understand, he continued. I will not help you to look for the forgiveness of others, as that is something I cannot influence. But I can help you to forgive yourself. The man separated from her and looked her in the eyes with his hands on her shoulders. Only when you understand the size of the weight you're carrying will you be able to finally live with it on your shoulders. You will likely never truly be free from it, but I can help you, by making sure you live the rest of your life. Whether you choose to spend it as a mortal or an immortal, in peace and tranquility. Naruto's speech seemed to have worked as he could feel her negative emotions dwindle. Medusa, will you embark on this journey with me? To rediscover what it means to be yourself. Naruto finished his piece by presenting her with his hand. The woman's snake hair was in disarray, her slitted eyes were a puffy red, and tear tracks ran down her cheeks. But even with that appearance, a shy smile adorned her face. Slowly, she raised her hand and grasped his own. Thank you, she muttered. Where will we go? There's nowhere I can escape their sight. The woman was understandably nervous the Olympians would end up finding her again. Ahaha. Don't worry about that. Naruto waved her worries away. No one's gonna be bothering you where I'm taking you. In fact, the blonde grinned with a certain glint in his eyes. One could say you'll be gone. He winked at her. Snort. Medusa held her hands to her mouth to stifle her giggles, but when Naruto wiggled his eyebrows at her she completely lost it and exploded in laughter. So much so that her eyes watered. "That was terrible," she said. After calming down and wiping her tears away, Naruto grinned at her and squeezed her hand before they disappeared in a flash. Moments later, the sage reappeared in the kitchen, looking quite pleased with himself. His face fell when he looked at the mess around him and the unfinished patties left on the counter. With a poof of smoke, a few shadow clones appeared around him and started cleaning up. While he went to the counter to finish the food. Even thousands of years later, the shadow clone technique would remain his favorite. The door leading to the Emporium's kitchen was pushed open by Naruto's back. He was balancing two large trays, each with 2 plates on them. A scrumptious-looking hamburger sat on each plate with a side of fries and a can of soda to accompany the meal. As he walked towards the table, he could see the kids were half asleep. Luke had his head to the table, and Annabeth, adorably enough, was using Talia's lap like a pillow. Zetsu for some reason seemed to be in some sort of trance. The raven-haired girl, upon seeing him, threw her hands up in exasperation. "Finally!" she exclaimed, jolting Annabeth and Luke awake. "We've been waiting forever. Were you guys making out or something?" Zetsu started coughing suddenly, having apparently swallowed his own spit after hearing that. Naruto blinked owlishly at Talia. No. Why would you think that? We heard a lot of noise. We wanted to go inside but Zetsu told us not to. Said you did this kind of thing often." The girl clarified. "So we thought you two were, doing adult stuff," Luke added with a teasing smirk. Naruto opened his mouth to answer but Annabeth interjected. "What's adult stuff?" the little girl asked with a head tilt. Talia and Luke blanched while Naruto looked at them accusingly, his expression twitching. "Ah, poop," the man forced a grin on your face. He stammered, "I'll tell you when you're older." The man hoped Annabeth would accept the answer. The girl frowned in response, but then shrugged and turned to look at some of the displays around them. Naruto sighed in relief. Best father ever or not, that question was something any dad dreaded to hear from heir daughters, or pseudo-daughters in this case, since the little minx insisted on calling him Mr. If only, the man despaired. It's been a long time since he last had a little girl to spoil, damn it. Anyway, about that, the father chuckled nervously and proceeded to explain the encounter with Medusa. He took great care to alter the story and present it as him taking care of her. Needless to say, the 3 demigods were all surprised and awed. Zetsu on the other hand had shifted back to his trance-like state. The sage recognized that look on his son's face. It was the same on he sported whenever he had a conversation with one of his duplicates. Naruto frowned at that, internally wondering when his son had even split himself since he hadn't done so in years. Could he be? Nah, the sage thought, dismissing any doubt he had about his boy. Zetsu wasn't like him. He wouldn't be rash enough to do anything that could expose them. Right. Olympus, main road, a little earlier. The golden city of Olympus was among the greatest sights that anyone could witness. A veritable El Dorado floating in the sky. Enriched with sublime architecture and peppered with various temples it housed the many deities of the Greek pantheon. It floated above the Empire State Building in New York City, invisible and untouchable to the mortals living below. Similar to the Big Apple, Olympus was quite a busy city. With various spirits, minor deities, and even a few mortals always out and about on the golden paved streets, either enjoying themselves or working tirelessly to serve their patrons. On the main road leading to the central plaza, residents held onto their togas as they felt a breeze blow past them. They looked around curiously, probably attempting to see what caused it. Was it Lord Zeus passing through again in an attempt to escape his wife? Was it Lord Hermes running hurriedly to another job? Perhaps a mischievous wind god wanting to cause some chaos. As it turns out, the culprit was not what any of them would expect. A shadowy figure moved at almost imperceptible speed, bouncing between shadows and darker spots erratically. A few miles later, the figure stopped and landed in a darker alley. Between 2 golden buildings, and dropped to the ground, away from prying eyes. The figure stood on its feet and pressed against the wall, its inky black complexion allowing it to disappear within the building's shadow. Shit, the figure thought frantically. A pair of yellow eyes opened in the darkness. More akin to a pair of dots, they moved left and right to scout the entrances of the alley. Judging itself to be safe, the figure detached from the wall, finally revealing itself to any outside observer. A Zetsu clone. Or more accurately, the same part. That Zetsu had split from himself about a month ago, had hitched a ride on Artemis, without the latter noticing the small worm-like creature sticking to the bottom of her sandal. When the goddess had eventually teleported to Olympus, the clone separated from the huntress and moved into hiding. He crept through the corners of the city, looking for anything to eat to gain some biomass and grow bigger. He couldn't eat anyone and there weren't any vermin for him to consume. That is, before he found heaven. Or more accurately, Demeter's private potager, which the goddess seems to put as much care in as a mother would in her child. As evidenced by the abundance of unearthly healthy-looking fruits, vegetables, legumes, and even fungi. 3 guesses as to what the clone did next. While Zetsu himself liked meat, in general. More than anything, the younger Uzumaki was very partial to greens. With Demeter's potager being as good as it was, and the clone being the same as his creator in terms of personality, the temptation was too great. So the clone started raiding the garden. Lightly at first, as he still had a mission to follow and could not blow his cover. Something which seemed to work for him as the weeks passed and he managed to learn a great deal of information from his prowls around the city. For one, it seemed like Artemis reported her findings to Athena, and the latter seemed satisfied with what the huntress told her. Seems like even if they attracted attention, Naruto and the original Zetsu still managed to pass as a non-threat. Either that or Athena truly believed in that Shinto theory of hers and opted not to risk a pantheonic war. For 2, the clone decided to stay the hell away from the pink monstrosity that was the love goddess's temple. Not only did it smell like perfume all the time and was, in his opinion, somehow a worse color than neon orange, but the spy also kept hearing the unmistakable sounds of intercourse emanating from the temple. Day in and day out. Yeah, no. He was keeping a good distance away from that menagerie. And for 3, it seemed like the security was pretty lax here, compared to the Taoists at least. No one could out-paranoid those bastards, not even the Olympian king. The only way in for mortals was through the Empire State Building, while immortals could get in with a variety of methods, and that was something the original Zetsu and his clones knew their way around. The clone would then continue his mission while occasionally visiting Demeter's garden to raid it. He would be the first to admit that he'd made a mistake by slowly growing bolder with his intrusions to the blonde goddess's property. If one were to ask the spy if it was worth it, he'd nod and say definitely. If one were to ask the harvest goddess about her view, however, well, let's just say Zetsu had gained an enemy on Olympus already. That is if the deity ever got to know who was responsible. The last time the clone saw her, Demeter had led an inhuman reach of rage before conjuring a very pointy pitchfork and marching to the council room. This brings us to where the clone's problem began. Evidently, a pissed-off Demeter could very well put the fear of herself into her youngest brother. Enough for him to call a meeting over her complaints to find out who was responsible. Seeing an opportunity to observe the Olympians more closely, he took the chance. Something that in hindsight, he should have been more careful about. Looking back, he might have been too rash, having hidden at the top of one of the columns, out of any of the gods' sight. Or so he had thought. Halfway into the harvest goddess's rant and demands to storm the underworld, since she suspected Hades was somehow behind this, the duplicate felt someone's gaze on him. Something that understandably surprised him since he was sure to be out of sight and was suppressing himself nigh perfectly. Taking a gander, the spy peeked from their perch in the direction he felt the gaze from. The second his yellow eyes met a pair of orange flames that acted as his observer's eyes, the spy made the wise decision to, as the original Zetsu would put it, get the fuck out of Dodge. So he ran away. And now he would have to tell the original he messed up and quite possibly compromised both Naruto and Zetsu because he got careless. Fuck, thought the clone, before he went ramrod. Straight as he detected something approaching. Hurriedly shifting his hands into spikes, he turned and pointed them where he sensed the presence coming from. A swirl of fire appeared in front of him as a figure manifested from it. Said figure seemed to be a child, veiled in brown robes and possessing a very warm presence. A child that, funnily enough, was only a foot taller than the clone's 3-foot-tall height. The child's eyes were the very same orange flames that the spy had seen before. Those same eyes seemed to twinkle in amusement as the girl raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Calm yourself, little one. I mean you no harm and I know you don't want to make a scene." Her voice was kind but authoritative. The clone being Zetsu in essence took offense to the first part. "Who are you calling little?" "No, scratch that. Who the fuck are you?" The little creature shifted its Glasgow-like mouth in a snarl and summoned more spikes from its body to threaten the stranger. He suddenly felt a great amount of pressure as the girl's flame-like eyes seemed to glow white and the temperature dramatically increased. The fire seemed to grow stronger around her as it burned the pointed ends of the spikes off. Now, watch that tongue of yours before I rinse it with soap," she waved a threatening finger. The duplicate internally debated on whether to book it, to fight, or to use its last resort and blow himself up. Before remembering the girl's first words. "What do you mean you know? How did you find out about me?" The clone did not retract its spikes, if anything, it grew more to replace the burned ones. "I just felt you, that's all. I've sensed a lot of curiosity directed at my siblings, but you seem to have a lot of anger and condescension for someone so little." The girl's power, similarly to the clone, did not wane and only rose in challenge. "Oi, what did I say about wait? You felt me? Impossible. My energy was completely suppressed. I might as well have passed for a house plant." The spy was in denial of its failure. The original Zetsu was an expert information gatherer and could appear and disappear without a trace. Naturally, his duplicates would inherit the same talents for espionage. The girl smiled in amusement at the soy's denial. "But your emotions were not," she stated matter-of-factly. Ellipsis. "You, she," the clone stammered before stopping himself when the girl arrowed her eyes at them. "You're an empath." "A passive one," he continued, knowing but dreading the answer. Empaths were already rare enough. Passive empaths, as in those that did not need to actively focus to use that ability. On the other hand, the odds of meeting one were astronomically low. Even Naruto, while being able to detect negative emotions passively, was at most an active empath who could only read someone's complete range of emotion when he was in physical contact with them. Passive empaths were dangerous, especially to spies like Zetsu, who had no way to completely erase their emotions without becoming a literal vegetable. The child's eyes twinkled in delight at his deduction and she nodded. And now that I've answered your question, how about an introduction?" She smiled disarmingly at the spy. "Huh, aren't you here to kill me? Or capture me?" The clone was honestly baffled at the stranger's nonchalant attitude. That could be excused as his power was suppressed. But there was no arrogance in her voice, only kindness. "Oh no, little one." The child waved an arm. "I sensed someone observing us and was very curious to know who it was. We rarely get new faces around here nowadays. And while I do not tolerate breaching people's privacy, especially that of my family, I could also tell you did not have any nefarious intentions. If you were, you would have do. Nay, a lot more than raid my little sister's garden." The girl threw the clone a pointed look. His cheeks, surprisingly enough, colored a shade of green in embarrassment at being called out for his actions. He did not even bother protesting her use of the adjective, little. He stammered, unable to formulate a defense before slumping. Fine, he wished the original was here, he'd have known what to do. Better yet, Zetsu might not have been caught. "Name's Z2, the spy muttered in a defeated tone. He really could not do anything else in this situation. Escaping would have prompted the girl goddess whatever to report her findings to Olympus and put them on high alert. Fighting would have accomplished nothing but attract attention. Same with the kamikaze option. Z2. The girl patted her cheek in surprise. Unaware she misspelled the name. "What a peculiar name," she said. "I am Hestia and it's a pleasure to meet you." Her next statement froze Z2. Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and the eldest Olympian. Sheet, he internally swore. He could not have messed up more badly than he did. Screw his gluttonous stomach. Screw his original in Naruto for passing down that weakness to him. And while he was at it, screw his luck for coming across the one person who could blow his cover. Z2's thoughts were interrupted when he felt a bar of soap get shoved into his mouth. "You thought of something rude, didn't you?" Hestia narrowed her eyes at him, now inches away from the gagging clone. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, present time. The original Zetsu sat with the rest of the kids at the table, waiting for the meal to arrive. Or more likely, just for Naruto to finish off Medusa and come back with the delicious burgers. Yes, Zetsu knew who the monster was. From the second he saw her and the statues. Unlike his dad, he did his homework properly before coming here. He had a reputation to keep after all. Master Sage, Master Meat Connoisseur, and Master Spy. Please recognize. Suddenly, he felt something akin to a mental prod in his mind. Knowing it was his clone, he opened the link to receive the report. Original, the clone greeted. Z2, the Yunj. R. Uzumaki gave the equivalent of a mental nod before asking, anything to report. I might have fuck air fricked up, the clone uncharacteristically stammered, making the Zetsu narrow his eyes dangerously. After all, they had a set protocol for this type of situation. Silence passed between them before the original spoke again. Explain, he ordered. Well, you know how we usually need to, damn it. I'll just let her explain, the clone once again stammered, further worrying Zetsu. Huh, her, who do you mean? Z2, what have you done? The original mentally shouted. Had their cover been blown already? What the fuck was his damn copy doing? He had one job. Hello, a feminine voice suddenly interjected. Who the fuck are you? Zetsu said, unknowingly repeating his clone's rude greeting. Do I need to come over here and clean your tongue too? There was a certain threatening undertone in her voice. She'll do it, original. Be careful. Z2 threw in his 2 cents. Screw this. Who are you? How did you find this idiot? The original was quickly reaching the end of his patience and did not have time for games. Hey, the clone yelled, offended. You shut up. Why? Oh, we're lucky I don't explode you remotely on principle. Zetsu mentally shouted at his clone. Now, there's no need for any violence here. Let me reintroduce myself. I am Hestia, the feminine voice interrupted the dispute. Ellipsis. At this moment, Zetsu truly knew he fucked up. His pops was never going to let him live this down. So he gave the most appropriate answer to the situation. Fuck me sideways. Donnie. And because I like y'all, here's a canon omake. Basically, a scene that I could not insert smoothly in the chapter. Leave me some reviews to tell me what you think. Closing parenthesis. Omake. Demeter was having a good day so far. She and her darling Persephone had just come back from a shopping trip together, to both spend time with one another and prepare for her daughter's inevitable return to that wretched place. People thought Hades could keep a grudge. Her little brat of a brother had nothing on her spite. Even after many millennia, she had never forgiven her brother for his crime. Regardless of how much Persephone tried to defend him, she should never have to be forced into any union like that. Zeus too, her even bigger brat of a brother, had just as much of a hand in their situation as the lord of the underworld. Shaking off the darker train of thought, the blonde goddess marched towards her temple, intending to check on her precious garden to make sure all her other babies were growing well. She had charmed her produce to routinely grow and make a varied batch throughout the year. So even though it was September, Demeter fully expected even winter fruits like oranges to be available today. She had just come to the potager's entrance when she felt something off about it. She stood to attention and marched through the various fields of green, looking for anything missing. Her head suddenly turned sharply in the direction of her legume section. She moved fast enough to become a blur to the naked eye and passed. Someone had taken the mature batch. Someone had taken her precious babies. The goddess clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, the corn cobs weaved into her hair popped up from her anger. Oh, this is on. Week 1, Traps. Demeter swept some dirt onto a tarp covering a pit she dug up. A large assortment of traps was laid around each field of produce, some even laid between the crops with enough care as to not harm them. The goddess smirked to herself. Whoever was foolish enough to cross her would certainly be caught. And then, well, she could always curse them. Mwahahahaha. The next morning, Demeter woke up refreshed and with an eager grin on her face. Oh, she could not wait to catch that rapscallion. She could already imagine his terrified expression, trying in vain to escape one of her traps. But alas, his or her fate would be sealed. For they had done a terrible deed, a crime so horrible she might just have too. Her thoughts trailed off as she came upon her garden. Not only were the traps untouched, this time, but the mysterious thief had also taken her precious fruits. Damn it, she clenched her fist. Week 2, Technical Support. Demeter looked into a series of monitors set up in her temple, just as her nephew finished the wiring on the latest screen and limped up to her with a notepad. Surveillance automatons, surveillance cameras with over 20 different kinds of vision, a laser grid, electric fences, sleeping gas, knockout gas and even laughing gas. There's a lot more to the site, but I'll save my breath and just say this should take care of your problem, Hephaestus said gruffly. Yes, thank you, nephew. The goddess waved a dismissive hand to the god, not moving her eyes away from the monitors. Hephaestus' beard let out a few sparks at the dismissal before huffing a whatever and teleporting out. Demeter rubbed her hands together and chuckled. Ellipsis. A few days later, the goddess became confident she had chased off the thief. While she would have preferred to catch them, and possibly torture them, she'd take what she would get. Oh, she should have thought about this before. Why work harder when she could work smarter? Sometimes her genius was so massive, it generated gravity. Ohoho, she could not wait. Why, she bet that fool was off crying at missing the divine flavor of her beautiful. Apparently, the tech was useless when the thief could just suck the carrots underground. Damn it. Week 3, Stakeout. Is this really how you want our last day together to be? Persephone stood with her arms crossed, dressed in a flowing black dress and looking radiant even in the dark color. Shish, dear, you'll alert the thief to our position. Demeter knelt behind a fake bush, dressed in military gear, with her hair tied beneath a helmet and her face painted green, black, and brown. She even had a pair of night vision goggles she had wrestled from her more violent nephew. Meh, he'll get over it. I just think this is a little over the top, Persephone said, exasperated with her mother's antics. Oh, relax, my little core. Don't call me that name. I'm not a child anymore, mother. The queen of the underworld cut her mother off with a shout of embarrassment. Oh, don't be like that, dear. Now settle down. I still need to find that little pest. Demeter waved a hand to her daughter, all too used to her childish tantrums, and attempted to put her focus back on her task. Oh, I'm settling down all right. I'll settle back to the underworld, the younger goddess huffed as she made to leave. That last statement had apparently been enough to snap Demeter's attention to her. Oh, come on. Do you have to return now? The blonde goddess whined at her daughter, her attention turned back to her. Her little core could be so mean sometimes. We've had the same discussion hundreds of times, mother. I need to go back to my husband. Persephone stomped her foot as she raised her voice. Oh, sewer. It's always Hades this, Hades that. Why is it you never care so much about me anymore? Demeter despaired. Oh, us. Mother. You know full well that's not what I mean. The younger goddess said, holding her head in frustration. Oh, I know what you meant. Schlop. What was that? Dem. Eder screeched in surprise and brought the goggles to her eyes, frantically looking around the potager. She had been so distracted arguing with her daughter she had foregone her task. Could the thief really have used such a small window to strike? The lack of tomatoes answered her question. A series of pops were heard before her helmet blew from her head in a shower of popcorn. Damn it. Week 4, Last Resort. This was it. Demeter was going to pull her trump card for this. As much as it pained her to do so, she had magically altered many of her babies into what can only be described as carnivorous plants on steroids. If the thief could evade detection, she'd make sure they wouldn't be able to eat anything by simply having their meals become too dangerous to consume. She didn't even care about her batch anymore. She just wanted to kill the little shit disrespecting her. At this point the goddess was unrecognizable, her hair was a mess, her toga was in disarray and her eyes had bags from sleep deprivation. It had gotten so bad that her servants had started giving her a wide berth. Let them be scared. She had half a mind to start interrogating them too if she hadn't already done so in the third week of this charade. She had gotten hysterical, to the level where she had foregone sleep, rest, and her duties for this task. Persephone had left for her stupid brother's domain and she was left alone to deal with this nonsense. Tonight would mark day 24 since that crime spree started. She sat on a chair overlooking her garden and looked at the monstrosities she had created, all of them moving and seemingly feeling out for any prey around them. Hey, This time, she'd get him. By Gia, her eyelids were getting heavy. Maybe a minute of rest would do no harm. Just a minute. Ellipsis. As sunlight hit her eyes, Demeter jolted awake, looking around like a madwoman. Surely nothing could have happened. Her worries were answered in the worst way possible when she noticed most of her newest plants lying limp on the ground and missing large chunks of their stems and whatever remained of their fruits. Demeter's face grew purple from rage as she manifested a pitchfork. This is the life. Blub. Just me, my boy, and nothing to bother us while we catch dinner. Ain't that right, Zetsu-chan? Blub, pwah, Zetsu exclaimed as he pulled his head out of the water. Naruto and Zetsu were seated in a small boat. Or more accurately, the elder of the two was lounging with his legs propped up, a straw hat on his face, and a fishing rod held in his hands. The young Uzumaki on the other hand sat at the edge of the vessel and kept dunking his head in the water. Zetsu was both trying to look for fish by stretching his neck down and holding his breath at the same time. Of course, he could simply grow gills or use a technique to generate oxygen, but the boy was as eccentric as his dad and liked to challenge himself sometimes. The boat itself was a double-hulled canoe and a gift to the two travelers from a distant island. The people there called themselves the Ivitans and were generally welcoming and hospitable if a little too superstitious. Naruto had decided to take the boat and sail it towards the east without any sort of map or navigation tools. Getting lost in the world was how one had fun after all. It's been a few months since their departure, and if Zetsu was right, they'd have to have drifted far to the east, probably further than any human civilization had ever been. Entire weeks would pass without any sight of landmass and it would Me's prompt both father and son to go into a deep slumber. On the upside, the peace allowed Naruto to work on his fishing skills or meditate, whichever helped alleviate the boredom. Pops, I saw something big. It's coming from that way. Zetsu pointed in a direction to Naruto's right. That jolted Naruto awake and he got up in a crouch, before reeling in his line. A dead bird attached to the fishing hook emerged from the water and was shot into the air by the blonde's tug. The man rotated the pole and directed the bait he was using in the direction Zetsu pointed at. Not even a moment after the bait was plunged into the water did the line go taut. Ooh, looks like I got it. I got it. Aha. Zetsu, my boy. Prepare to witness the greatness that is Naruto N. Uzumaki. Best fisherman. The blonde yelled while doing some exaggerated tugging motions, seemingly fighting a tug of war with the animal. Said tug of war was causing the ship to sway dangerously and water to splash into the vessel. Stop playing around with it and just pull it out, Pops. You'll capsize the ship. The green-haired boy screamed as he kicked at his father. But I just want my boy to be amazed. Your dad is super strong, you know. The father whined. I know you're strong, Pops. But I don't want to get all our stuff wet. The boy pleaded as he held onto the mast for dear life. The man paused and sighed. Fine. He stopped his tugging as he suddenly stood straight. The boat even stopped swaying and the water around them went completely still. The man then reeled the fishing pole back quickly and the sea exploded. In front of them as a giant sea monster emerged, pulled up by the line. Naruto did not blink in surprise at the creature, which looked like a giant tuna fish. He simply pointed two fingers at its head and fired a small electric bullet. Lightning style. Bee sting. The bullet struck the creature under the mouth and came out from the other side, effectively hitting and frying its brain in the process. The giant tuna dish landed on its side, floating lifelessly next to the boat. Before both travelers could say anything, the fish's side opened up and a large cloud of steam erupted from within the wound. The corpse itself shriveled before morphing into another shape. Looking more akin to a large egg, the fish's new form cracked and an inscription appeared on its side. Seeing as the fishing hook was now stuck in the egg, Naruto tugged the object towards the boat before peering into it with his son. It came to both Uzumaki's surprise as within the egg, lied a sleeping, pudgy dark-skinned baby. The boy, as was apparent from his naked state, looked to be a few months old and had a thick tuft of curly black hair sitting upon his head. The little one opened his eyes at the sudden movement of his crib. Before spotting a man and a monster gazing at him curiously, he began crying and wailing in fright. Naruto immediately reached into the egg and took the surprisingly heavy baby out before holding him in his arms. Something which calmed the boy somewhat. Zetsu for his part noticed the inscription on the side of the egg, which shockingly enough, was written in Chinese script. Maui, the boy read, surprised. The entire situation looked eerily familiar to the short Uzumaki and he couldn't help to think that it was no coincidence. What were the odds of a baby not only emerging fr. Own the fish but having a familiar script written on its crib? Someone or something had sent the infant to them. Huh, what's this? Oi, what the hell? Naruto's shout snapped Zetsu out of his thoughts. Oi oi, who the hell were this kid's shitty parents? The man shouted as his energy flared from his apparent anger. The waves around the boat picked up violently and the boat itself started swaying from the onslaught of energy. The sage had seen something blue imprinted on the child's shoulder and out of curiosity, had turned the boy around to look at his back. What he saw made his blood boil. Whoever it was that sent the child, they'd seen fit to tattoo its back with an image of two silhouettes throwing a smaller one to the sea. One did not need to be a genius to figure out this meant the child was abandoned to die. Said Chid, as if sensing the immense show of power, had started crying again. Something that had the sage quell his rage almost immediately. The man reached up with his hand and started tickling the baby's belly, making its cries of fright turn into giggles of mirth. Ah, this is bad, what are we going to do? Zetsu asked the more obvious question. Naruto looked at the now laughing boy with kindness. Not even a year old and already hated by the world, huh? Well, looks like I'm a dad again, huh? Bahahaha. The blonde laughed as he made his decision. Ugh, the younger Uzumaki thought in annoyance. Yes, he could understand where his father came from, but couldn't he see someone out there was trying to order them around? Or had a path laid out to the kid? Maui, huh? A great name for a brave warrior of the sea. Bahahaha. Naruto simply did not care. He was quite happy being a father, and the baby himself was happy to find a family as well. The adventurer meets the sage Tilda. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 3rd of September, 2000. As Apollo's chariot peeked over the horizon, the building and the surrounding forest were bathed in its ray of warmth, prompting the rise of various animals and the chirps of the early birds. Away from any urban noise pollution, the Emporium was instead exposed to nature's lullaby. All in all, it looked like a very peaceful morning. You did what? A scream came out and shook the front sign off the building. Naruto paced with his arms held behind his back and sporting an angry look on his face. Zetsu on the other hand stood to the side in his true form. The younger Uzumaki held one of his arms as he looked at the floor. He held himself more akin to a guilty child than anything else. The group had spent the night at the Emporium, using Medusa's old mattress, some of her cushions, and their own sleeping bags to get comfortable. While the girls had taken a room, Luke had opted to sleep in the same room as the Uzumakis. Naruto for his part had been a tad worried. Zetsu had remained eerily silent throughout the evening, even as his negative emotions spiked at random intervals. The son had eventually talked to Hi's father and convinced him to put a privacy seal on both rooms so they could have a conversation outside without worrying about the demigods eavesdropping. Zetsu had pulled Naruto outside, morphed back into his inky black 3-foot self and proceeded to let out what was bothering him all night. Evidently, Naruto's worries were very much valid. There was one thing we had to avoid, Zetsu. The father raised a finger for emphasis. I know, Pops. You made a technique just so we could get in and out undetected. The man did not stop, even as he interrupted his son. Yes, I did. I don't need a second heavenly war on my hands. Do you know how much was destroyed last time? I don't need to see half the country burned to cinders. Naruto waved his hands as he ranted. They won't. Of course they will. Do you think they give a shit if millions perish in the crossfire? Okwang and his posse didn't. That fucker Mara didn't. And I'm not willing to take that risk. Naruto held his hands to his face. Memories of a past war he'd long repressed briefly surged back. Forests in ashes, mountains decimated, the bodies of thousands of creatures lying in various mangled states, the smell of death prevalent in the air. All that unnecessary, avoidable loss of life. Boss, help us. Ellipsis. Pops. Zetsu's shout snapped the man out of his brief episode. The man looked at his son in surprise. Eyes glowing gold and expression frantic. It's okay. Z2, my stupid duplicate, told me the one who found us just wants to meet us and talk, the smaller Uzumaki said with his hand up in an effort to calm his father down. An eyebrow raised in interest, Naruto asked the most obvious question. And who's that? Hestia, Zetsu replied simply. Hestia. The man stretched her name out, expecting his son to elaborate. The green-haired Uzumaki's palm met his face in a wet slap as he sighed. The eldest Olympian, goddess of the family and home, hearth, domesticity, virginity, and the state, he trailed off. Noticing a flash of recognition light up in the man's eyes. Oh. The man clapped his fist with his palm in realization. You mean the good one? He said. Zetsu's hands twitched before he made a strangling motion, whilst muttering curses under his breath. Yes, the good one, the son nodded resignedly. Naruto did have a point since Hestia was the only Olympian without any innocent blood on her hands. But it frustrated Zetsu to no end that his father never seemed to take information gathering as seriously as he did. So what did you mean before? About her coming to meet us? The sage asked. Well, she asked to come immediately, but my clone briefed her on the other kids, so they decided to come in the morning, the younger Uzumaki explained. Cool, so is your clone gonna bring her here? Naruto trailed off, unsure of the next course of action. We already said her name twice, she should know where we are, Zetsu explained matter-of-factly. The Greeks could, like other gods, sense when they were being talked about, which did make their infiltration harder than it had to. But that sense only applied to their names and names alone and in the areas they had influence in. Just as Zetsu predicted, a swirl of fire appeared in the air in front of the duo, and a young woman materialized from it. Hestia had taken an older appearance, now looking more like an adolescent, while Z2 hitched a ride on her shoulders like a child. Zetsu's eyes zeroed in on his clone, who for his part, dropped from his perch and hid behind the goddess's legs in fear of what his creator would do. Original, hi. Z2 peeked out from behind Hestia. The deity in question held a hand to her mouth to stifle her giggles at the display before regaining her composure. Ahem, hello there. You must be Zetsu and Mr. Naruto, this little one told me much about you, she gestured to Z2. Oh, did he now? Zetsu hissed, making the clone eep and hide back behind the veiled woman. Don't let him kill me. Big sis. The clone cried out. That last part prompted a raised eyebrow from Naruto. Big sis. You foo. The woman giggled again at the little creature before looking at the blonde subject of interest. So, you're the one behind all the recent ruckus. She smiled at the man. Naruto smiled back, sensing no negative emotions coming from the woman, and approached her with his hand out. Yup. Naruto N. Uzumaki. Nice to meetacha, he said cheerily, seemingly forgetting about his earlier reservation. Oh, don't get him wrong, he was still mad at his son for his stew. And apprehensive of the potential risk of blowing their cover. But sensing no negativity coming from Hestia alleviated some of his worries, which prompted a more diplomatic response. Nnd he nay. Added physical contact to get a complete readout of the woman. Yes sir, dumb high IQ move indeed. Hestia looked at him amusedly, as if she knew what he was thinking, before raising her smaller hand and let it be enveloped in his larger one. Several things happened for both parties in that instant. Both Naruto and Hestia's eyes widened, one in pleasant surprise and the other in muted shock. Such a beautiful soul. Naruto's eyes began to water at what he had felt. Anything he might have read did not do the woman justice, all the myths could not come close to describing the sheer purity of her soul, of her very essence. Everything about her screamed wholesome, so much so that Naruto had to rein in every fiber of his being that demanded he gives the goddess hugs and headpats. A brief RGE of rage overtook him when he got glimpses of her early life. Of Kronos. Forget any reservations he might have had. After this, he was going to drown her in his fatherly affection. It's the least he could do. Hestia's thoughts, on the other hand, while similar, were also overwhelmed by a feeling of dread, for she had been exposed to the man's true self. Meaning she had come to know just who she was dealing with. The legendary gallant sage of the East, one of the more obscure figures in the Asian continent. She hadn't much thought about him, since he seemed to never make too much of an appearance other than in texts and hearsay. She had even gone as far as to, ironically enough, label him a myth. That was before the Heavenly War, which had sent ripples of fear and apprehension through the supernatural world. An event that had resulted in one of the strongest pantheons in history to capitulate to, from what she had known, a single entity. The fact that said entity did not belong to a pantheon had almost sent panic through their ranks as it had done to so many others. With that into account, it was quite surprising that the day Hestia finally met the sage, he had completely blown her expectations aside. Were she to ever meet him, she had expected an arrogant, selfish, and cruel person, not this. This saint, regardless of the frightening amount of power he possessed and how eerily similar his energy felt to that of her grandmother, his aura, his emotions, everything about him pointed towards a genuinely kind-hearted man. Humble despite the abilities he possessed and forgiving despite his dark past. He was the sort of person she had, sadly enough, only ever seen a very small handful of. In fact, the person most similar to him would be, surprisingly enough, her own mother. With what her ex-husband had done to her, one would think the former Titan Queen would have become a bitter woman. Instead, the Olympians had thankfully gained a parent so kind and gentle. Hestia genuinely felt overwhelmed whenever her dear mother visited them, whether individually or on Olympus. Rhea was simply one of a kind, or at least she was until she'd met Naruto here. Why did she feel chill at the thought of the two ever crossing paths? While both Naruto and Hestia were occupied in their own thoughts, Z2, seeing his only protection had disappeared, eked as several spikes attempted to pierce him. The clone shifted his body around the sharp extensions and moved back, almost blurring from sight as he scrambled to escape his original's rage. "Come back here, you little bitch!" Zetsu screamed as he shifted and grew, resembling an eldritch horror as several black spikes and tentacles launched themselves at the clone. The spikes struck true before a poof of smoke enveloped the clone, leaving behind a punctured wooden log. Zetsu quickly looked around and found an open window, with a black tendril barely getting out of it. The green-haired Uzumaki saw red. "ZETWOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOOO trance-like state. Meanwhile, Luke, Talia, and Annabeth remained blissfully unaware to the happenings outside. They were content to have a good night's sleep under a roof after a month spent under the stars. Well, that was a short one. I feel like I need to add a chronology of events so people don't get confused. I made a timeline on a separate Google Doc which I will post at the end here. I might end up making an information chapter or a QA chapter to clear up some confusion y'all might have seen. I feel like I'm throwing a lot of random information in. You can also ask me to mention or explain something you feel is confusing. Oh, and here's a silly omake I thought of. Didn't know what came over me when I did it. Omake. The words, The Tonight Show with Bonan Okrian, flashed on the screen with the words, for supernaturals, being written in tinier script under it. A jazzy introduction Ehmed played accompanied by the applause of a live audience. A pale-looking man with striking orange hair and pointed ears sat on an oak desk in a corner of the stage, clad in a fancy green suit and sporting a winning smile. Looking quite similar to a tall leprechaun, he waited a few moments for the audience to calm down. Welcome ladies and gentlemen to Wait for It tonight's show, Bonan winked at the crowd. BADUM-TSS. Cue audience dying of laughter. Jokes aside, I have the pleasure to inform you that today, we've got something good. It was pretty difficult to get into contact with them, but tonight's guests are one of a kind. Now I know I'm supposed to present their resume, but we don't have enough airtime for that. The man's teeth sparkled as he smiled at the crowd. BADUM-TSS. Cue audience dying of laughter. Aha, I'm too much, I know. The leprechaun wiped a fake tear from his eye before gesturing to the far left of the stage. So without further ado, please give it up for the legendary gallant sage of the East and his son, the famous Naruto and Zetsu. Applause. Naruto and Zetsu, dressed in a pair of black suits with an orange and green tie respectively, came out from backstage and waved at the audience. They both walked towards the host and shook his hand before taking a seat on the large leather couch next to the desk. The host walked back towards his own seat and greeted them, beginning a classic string of scripted questions before getting to a particularly interesting one. Say, Mr. Naruto, I'm sure the people at home would love to know the answer to this particular question. But which of the two of you is stronger? Well, Bonin, that's actually a pretty easy one to answer. You see, it's simple, the sage began before his son cut in. I'm the stronger one. Cue audience ooze. Excuse me. The father said offended. I'm the strongest Pops and I can prove it. The son did not relent on his stance, if anything he seemed more sure of himself. What's the one thing you or anyone, no matter how powerful, cannot do? What is the one event that every creature on Earth fears like Armageddon? Zetsu elaborated, looking at Naruto and Bonin questionably. Gasp. Zetsu number. UCA. In mean, Naruto went pale as he saw where his son was heading. Zetsu, yes. The truth is, I am the only person alive on Earth who cannot fear such a thing. The younger Uzumaki said, his eyes widening. Look at me. Look at what I can do. The small imp took on various shapes, all of them crazier than the last. Big deal. I can do that too. Naruto transformed into Zetsu to prove his point. But you cannot change your very nature. It is indeed unfortunate, Pops, but unlike you, I cannot be cancelled, the boy screamed out. I am a 3-foot-tall black Asian monster who can shapeshift into literally anything. Zetsu raved. I can say anything I want. I can even say the word. He exclaimed, prompting the other men to jump on surprise. Anything but the word. Bonin yelled, fearing for his ratings, but Zetsu was unabashed. Fool. Witness my power knee. PSSSSSSHHHHHH. The show was abruptly cut, a sign with the words, technical difficulties, being left in place. What the hell? Is that Kagaya? Oi, weren't you sealed? You speak of my previous shell, this is a different one. What do you mean? The one known as Kagaya Otsutsuki was nothing more than an extension of my true self with naught but a silver of my power. A medium to use whilst my main body continued to slumber. Who? No, what are you? You may know me as the mother of all earthly life, the one whose body you insects have chosen to inhabit and desecrate. Quote. I am Gaia. Memories of an Age's End. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium, 3rd of September, 2000. And then, after scaring me half to death, the little brat had the nerve to laugh at me. Zetsu heard his father exclaim before the ensuing giggling of their guest emitted from the inn. He had just come back from re-assimilating Z2 into him. The clone had Pr. Oven to be every bit as crafty as the original. Unfortunately for it, as soon as Zetsu's rage subsided, he had remembered the fact he could simply remote control his duplicates and simply did so. Zetsu, you finally come back. Come here and introduce yourself to this lovely young lady. You foo. Hestia held a hand to her mouth as her cheeks colored a bit. I think you'll find I'm anything but young Naruto. She said modestly, only for the blonde man to wave his hand dismissively. What do you mean? I'm the old man here. Bahahaha. The man laughed. Seeing the previous tension in the air had dissipated, the green-haired Uzumaki decided to join in on the conversation. Pops, what were you talking about? That. Oh, I was telling Hestia about that time your brother, remember little Maui? At Zetsu's nod he continued, anyway. I was talking about that time he faked drowning in the ocean. Took after his old man in the pranking department, that one. Bahahaha, the man slapped his knee as he reminisced about one of his sons. Zetsu nodded at the answer. He indeed remembered that one, and although he was more obnoxious than he'd liked, his little brother was still one of the best people he had met. The legacy he'd left behind among the people of the Pacific ensured that, myth or not, Maui would remain a beloved figure to everyone who heard his story. After Naruto calmed down, he finally gestured for his son to sit next to him. Ya no. Hestia-chan here, the woman in question raised an eyebrow at the honorific, has told me an interesting story. Zetsu began to pale in dread. ND made to escape before feeling his father's hand grip his scalp and freeze him in place. A story which my dear boy conveniently forgot to mention in his recounting last night, about how my son, who I know I've raised better than that, has gone and committed petty theft and driven her poor sister to hysteria. Naruto's tone, coupled with his glowing eyes, gave him a menacing vibe. It wasn't me, Pops. My stupid clone did that. The younger Uzumaki pleaded. Wham! Ow! Boy! Hestia jumped in surprise at the blonde's sudden movement. He moved at high speed, let go of Zetsu's scalp before delivering his patented chop of fatherly disappointment not a nanosecond later. Unlike my clones, yours are technically other versions of you, they would literally do anything you would, Zetsu. Not only that, but you also went and committed the greatest mistake you could possibly have. The father scolded his son. Hestia nodded in agreement and gave a look of understanding to the blonde. Although somewhat harsh, she could understand the boy needed to be disciplined. He's a good parent, she thought, impressed, and was once again reminded of her mother. Naruto's hand raised in the air and delivered a second, just as intense, chop. Wham! Oh, pranking 101. Never get caught, and if you are, shake off the blame. You took back the clone before he could face justice. What is this, amateur hour? The sage threw up his hands in exasperation. Zetsu for his part nursed the growing lump on his head with both hands. I'm sorry, Pops. Don't apologize to me, you idiot. Ah, Hestia mentally gawked at the outrageous actions. Never mind. It seemed the man had more layers to him than she had thought. Not even their exchange earlier that day could truly prepare her for his unpredictableness. A very strange man indeed. Well, now that this is over with, Naruto said, before once again grabbing his son by the head and forcing him to bow alongside him, I wish to formally apologize for my son's behavior. If I meet your sister, I will make sure he apologizes to her and compensates her for the damages, the man said resolutely. Sorry for the trouble, both father and son said in the same breath. The goddess stood a little surprised. It was unnerving for her to see someone so powerful bow their head to her, or even act so much unlike her expectations. But then again, she'd come to learn in her long life that preconceived notions could never truly decide the way one should see the world. It's all right, please raise your heads, she said softly. Naruto did so and shot a grin at the goddess. You really are kind, Hestia-chan. Most people wouldn't hesitate on guilt-tripping me into doing whatever they want, the man said before bouncing closer to her, still in a seiza position. He stopped when he was within 2 feet of her and leaned his face closer to hers. She almost recoiled back had it not been for the fact she could sense no lust in his actions. The man settled for simply gazing at her with a grin, his eyes looking into her flaming pair. Ellipsis. Before she could ask what he was doing, she felt the man's hand land on her head gently. Pat pat. The blonde, voice filled with joy, while tactlessly giving the eldest Olympian a head pat. Something not even her siblings had ever done. Oh, the goddess flushed a golden color in embarrassment, and reflex took over. Slap. The deity's hand shot up and smacked the blonde's cheek. The force of the strike was something the man clearly did not expect as he was sent careening into and through a wall. Zetsu looked on, not appearing to be the least bit worried. If anything, she could sense a tiny amount of vindictiveness from the shorter Uzumaki. Not even 10 seconds later, 2 doors swung open, with Talia and Luke came out of their respective rooms in sleepwear and brandishing their weapons. While the privacy seals soundproofed the rooms they were in, they did not prevent them from feeling the entire building shake from Hestia's strike. What was that, Mr. Naruto? I felt the entire room shake. Both shouted at the same time. They spotted a veiled woman with orange flames where her eyes would be, standing and looking at them in surprise with a hand extended. Naruto for his part was nowhere to be seen but from the big hole in the adjacent wall. One could only think that the lady, with her abnormal appearance and body frozen in motion mid-strike, was clearly a monster. Both demigods shouted and ran at the surprised deity, spear and golf club raised in the air. Die! A single war cry tore out of their throats as they flung themselves at their perceived enemy. Oomph! Before they could get any closer, air escaped their lungs as they were abruptly blocked and hoisted up over Zetsu's shoulders, who had taken his human disguise. Stop it, you two! She's not a monster, that now teenage-looking Zetsu's voice cut through Luke and Talia's protests and struggles. A few minutes later, both teens were calmed down and sat on the ground with many questions on their minds. Zetsu had taken a similar position facing them while Hestia sat at the edge of the trio, getting back her bearings. Booming laughter erupted from outside the destroyed wall, cutting through the tension. Bahahahaha. You're packing a hearty wallop in those stringy arms, aren't you? Naruto had an easy-going grin on his face, despite the red handprint taking up a third of it. He did not look like a man who was just had eloquently speaking, the bitch slapped out of him by an embarrassed goddess. The sage stepped over the still standing portion of the wall and got back into the room to look at the occupants. Talia and Luke were looking at him like he had grown a second head. Zetsu's palm was acquainting itself, once again, with his face, and Hestia. The goddess did not take teasing well from how golden her face had gotten. Naruto's grin widened. Ah, nothing like some comedy to ease up the tension. Why, he had the perfect pun prepared for this occasion. Seems like we got ourselves a, he looked at the four seated people, situation, he winked for added effect. Ellipsis. The other four occupants stared at the winking man in silence, all with different thoughts. Hiya! A scream rang out from Talia's room as little Annabeth, clad in a makeshift pillow armor she'd tied with parts of the bed covers, came out of the door swinging. She wielded a hammer and a small dagger in either hand and tried her hardest to look as threatening as possible. Silence reigned once more. Naruto's face was still frozen mid-wink. No one spoke for a few seconds. Fit. Hestia's cheeks puffed out suddenly before the goddess, followed by everyone sans Annabeth exploded in laughter. The little girl looked confused before laughing meekly alongside the group. Bahahaha. That was great. Naruto wiped a tear from his eye as he sat in the same position he was in before his trip through the wall. Fu. Indeed, I have not laughed like this in quite so. Me time. Hestia's face was still flushed, but this time from sheer mirth. Her statement drew a shocked look from Naruto. That's a darn shame, he faltered when she held up a bar of soap threateningly. I mean. One should always laugh. Makes living fun. Ha ha ha. He laughed uneasily. Well, you'll be surprised at how dull Olympus can get. If it wasn't for the occasional fights I have to break up or my nephew's TV show, I doubt there would be much for me to do, the deity said somewhat melancholically. Slam. Everyone sans Naruto and Zetsu jumped in surprise when the blonde slammed his palm to the ground. A tense atmosphere enveloped them as the man's hair hid his eyes. That, he said lowly before raising his head, revealing a smirk, is unacceptable. Tell you what, how about spending some time with us? Wah. But, Pops, you can't. Shush. The man's words silenced any protests Talia, Luke and Zetsu might have had. Annabeth for her part had retreated back to her room to read. After taking off the in Naruto's opinion adorable outfit, much to the man's chagrin. Hestia-chan here has been nothing but a delight to be around. He ignored the groan coming from his son. Before continuing, the whole point of this trip is to have fun. I thought it was getting to camp, Luke whispered to Talia, heedless of the older blonde's glare. And I will not let anyone feel excluded. I expect you to give her a warm welcome and for all of us to get along. The sage finished his statement. Talia and Luke seemed satisfied, but Zetsu looked constipated. Naruto briefly realized the hypocrisy of his actions. He had just scolded his own son for potentially blowing their cover, and yet here he was willing to mingle around with one of the beings they were supposed to hide from. What can he say? In for a penny, in for a pound, might as well gain Hestia's friendship. She seemed like a nice gal, especially with how happy she looks right now. The goddess of the hearth was positively touched by the invitation. She could feel an inner giddiness at being able to spend time with not just the demigods her family but also the father and son who had become a great subject of interest to her. It occurred to her how rare such an instance was, where she was able to drop her guard around outside of Olympus, especially around her family. Oh, she could not wait to learn more about the three demigods. What were their likes, dislikes, ambitions or dreams for the future? What were their personalities like? From her brief glimpse into their emotions, it seemed her niece was more like her father than she realized. A little spitfire, that one. Her grandnephew Luke seemed a bit of a downer, but if what she'd heard from Hermes was correct, that was, unfortunately enough, a natural result of his past. And little Annabeth. That little ray of sunshine absolutely must be protected. Ah, it was almost like seeing a child version of Athena. So cute. If only her little brother hadn't been such a stickler when it came to gods seeing their children, she'd have been all over watching over the children. Sigh. Well, only one thing to do now. I gladly accept your offer, Mr. Naruto. But please, let me make breakfast for you all. It's the least I could do. She said earnestly. Wah. No way. You're a guest here. The blonde waved his arms in front of him in disagreement. I assure you it'll be no trouble at all. Cooking is a pleasure for me, especially for family. The deity insisted. Ah, but aren't you all about manners? Well, it'd be bad of me to let you work. The man argued. Oh shush, it'll be done in an instant. She waved away his concerns. Oh come on, I was going to make my super special breakfast ramen. He pleaded. I think not. Noodles are not a good way to start the day, she disagreed vehemently. Gasp, you take that back. The blonde looked as if he was physically struck by that statement. You foo, if anyone needs me, I'll be in the kitchen. She disappeared in a swirl of fire. Oi, come back here. Naruto ran towards the kitchen. Talia and Luke watched the back and forth with conflicting expressions. Talia for her part was mostly surprised at how calm Mr. Naruto and Zetsu were being in this situation, so much so that the father was bantering with her. Bantering with an all-powerful goddess. What even was this? Can someone be that brave, or was it just pure stupidity? What? I am so lost right now, she admitted honestly, and Luke for his part nodded with her statement. I hear you, I knew Mr. Naruto had guts, but I didn't know he had AD. Eth wish too, he said in a deadpan before huffing as the Ravenette's elbow dug into his side. Don't be mean, she said with a frown before sighing and crossing her arms. But yeah, you're right, I mean I'm not dreaming, right? She pointed at the kitchen door. That was Hestia, right? My aunt, she questioned. Yup, the teen admitted. My dad's sister. Eldest Olympian. The freckled. Yup, his tone was the same. Quote. She sounds pleasant enough, Talia admitted reluctantly. Yup. Say, yup, one more time and you'll be making another sound. The girl shot the smirking blonde a glare. Luke opened his mouth as if to taunt her, before wisely closing it and nodding, smirk still in place. Talia huffed before turning to look back at the door. I can't trust her yet, she muttered. Same, he nodded without any fuss. They'd already been screwed over enough by their supposed family, they couldn't let their guard down now. Mr. Naruto and Zetsu might have been strong enough to fend off monsters, but gods were in a different league. Talia flinched when she felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Luke looking at her seriously. No matter what, we'll stick together, okay? He said resolutely. Ellipsis. Okay, her cheeks colored a bit at his intense gaze. Later. This is so unfair, thought Zetsu, as he sat on a table with the demigods and waited for their meals. I make a single mistake and get bonked. But Pops can just go ahead and open up to anyone he wants. You. He internally groaned. Are you okay there, buddy? Luke asked worriedly after seeing a constipated look appear on the Uzumaki's face. Yeah, you've been awfully silent since all this happened. What? Are you scared or something? What started off as concern from Talia was quickly replaced with her usual snark. No, I am not. Zetsu said firmly before putting up a hand to support his cheek, but I am apprehensive of the potential risks of this development. He did not elaborate further, opting to ponder on a possible solution for their problem. It was by sheer luck that the only person to discover him knowing about them. So you're scared, the Ravenette sported a large teasing grin. No. Before the two could start a fight, the door to the kitchen opened and an enticing aroma flooded the room. The group all felt their mouths watering at the positively divine smell, as Hestia and Naruto walked back into the room. Each with a plate stacked with pancakes on each hand. 2 extra plates were put down for the 2 adults as put down the stacks. As a finishing touch, Hestia snapped her fingers and a bottle of maple syrup appeared and a bowl of fruits appeared in the middle of the table. The demigods eagerly piled their plates with the fluffy breakfast food. Luke paused before eating as he held Talia and Annabeth's shoulders. They looked at each other and nodded before looking up at the goddess's expectant gaze. Thank you, Lady Hestia. The 3 said after remembering their manners, drawing a great SM. Il on both the deity and the elder blonde's face in the process. Naruto sharply looked at Zetsu with the same expectation. The younger Uzumaki, who had been in the process of cutting his own pancakes, paused at his father's look. Yeah, thanks I guess, he said awkwardly. When he saw his father narrow his eyes, he huffed and recomposed himself. I mean, thank you for the meal. Zetsu clasped his hands and lowered his head in gratitude to the goddess of the hearth. Hestia smiled at the children in front of her. Oh, no thanks necessary, my dears. Simply enjoy my food and that'll be enough for me, she said kindly. making Naruto internally gush at the wholesome scene. Zetsu shrugged before taking a cut part of his pancakes and bringing it to his mouth. Damn, the smell was really amazing. Once the treat entered his mouth, however, he felt his mouth explode with flavor. This is, he thought, as his face reddened in joy. Nirvana. He internally shouted as he felt his own soul get lighter. That was the day the expert food critic, Zetsu N. Uzumaki, learned what the perfect pancake was. Oh, by the way, I never asked you, Zetsu, but whatever happened to your little friend? The goddess asked, referring to Z2. Her question snapped the dazed Zetsu from the other occupants. The demigods were lost in their own happy places as the delicious food did wonders on their taste buds. Naruto simply snickered before piling up his own plate and dribbling maple syrup all over it. Ah, poop, Zetsu adequately answered. Naruto felt himself floating in an endless space, illuminated by various multicolored orbs from which emerged bridges of energy, flowing and disappearing into the abyss around him. He didn't say anything as he continued to look at the spectacle. It was, of course, only his own mental projection. Something that his mind was experiencing while his physical body lay in a meditative state, not moving a single muscle. He didn't know how much time had passed since he'd been here. Having lost all sense of time in this exercise. Damn, I wonder how Kurama and the others are doing. He missed spending time with his siblings, but this was a necessary sacrifice to attain the power he needed. As Naruto passed by some of the shining orbs, his mind went back to the start of this training. Upon releasing Kurama, Naruto could safely say he'd physically been at his weakest since the time his partner was forcefully extracted from him back in the Fourth Shinobi World War. It was only then that he'd come to terms with his situation, he'd realized how utterly fragile he'd become. Sage or not, it was a hard pill to swallow that Kurama had been the biggest reason for his previous strength. That fact was unacceptable to Naruto. Gaia had opened his eyes to the existence of godlike entities in the world. It had shown him just how high the stakes were, as crazy as that is. If he wanted to protect his precious people, he would need to be strong enough to fight the entire world. So, seeing as he was immortal, he trained. He trained harder than he ever did, trying to master the techniques he knew and the different arts he learned over his travels after the war. What he was doing right now had honestly been a gamble. An attempt to reach a level beyond sagehood, to surpass the limits and weaknesses of sage mode, and reach new horizons. He had gone into a meditative position and hadn't moved since. Eventually, his mind went blank, there were no thoughts to speak of anymore, nothing for his mind to see but nothingness. And suddenly, he found himself here. Floating, swimming, with nothing but these strange apparitions to distract him. Hesitantly, Naruto raised a hand and let it be engulfed in one of the flowing rivers of energy, and suddenly H.E.C. felt something pulse and course into his very being. This is, he trailed off in awe while looking at the different orbs. He pulled his hand back, which was now attached to the glowing energy, letting him stay connected to one of the larger orbs. He raised his opposing hand and with a thought, a small ball of flames manifested, looking like a miniature sun. He looked again at the orb he was linked to and saw it resonated with similar energy. With another thought, the small tendril of energy was cut off and the ball of flames disappeared with it. The blonde-haired man raised that same hand again and touched another glowing river. This one colored a light blue. A different orb, one that emitted vapor and felt cold to the touch, appeared in his unoccupied hand. He could only come to one conclusion. Those are domains. Preview to perfect sagehood. Olympus Athena's Temple, 3rd of September, 2000. Books, documents, and papers of all sorts flew around the large library making up the goddess of wisdom's temple. Said black-haired deity was pacing in front of her large desk located at the middle of the temple, clad in a simple gray toga for comfort over presentation. She held one of the many books while other documents floated around her, all within of which were being read simultaneously before being replaced by others. Her gray eyes were glowing intensely and seemed to gloss over information at a ridiculously high speed. Her reading paused briefly when she heard her temple's gate open, before resuming her work after sensing the familiar energy of her sister. It wasn't long before Rhea appeared from around one of the large bookshelves making up Athena's maze of a library. The brunette had taken her adult form and walked towards her sister while looking around at the chaos occurring around them. The goddess of the moon stopped before her sister and looked at her worriedly. "Is this a good time?" she asked, making the wiser sibling pause in her work. Without looking up from her documents, Athena uttered a simple, "No," before going back to her reading. "Sister, I'm worried about you." Artemis paused to see if the woman would respond. When she did not, the brunette continued, "Father's worried too. You've been here for the last 2 weeks and haven't so much as taken a peek outside." Sister. Artemis narrowed her eyes as Athena continued to ignore her, saying her mumble something unintelligible. Upon seeing some signs of fatigue on the goddess of wisdom, namely the bags under her eyes and the slightly messy hair, something that Athena would never allow to happen normally, the brunette became genuinely worried and hurried up to her sister's side. "Athena." She grabbed the busy deity, which caused her to turn sharply towards the huntress with an irritated look. "What?" she said stiffly. "Can't you see I'm working on something important?" she continued. "Athena," the brunette sighed, "you always do this. Every time you have a project on your mind, I have to come here and push you to take a rest." She crossed her arms in irritation. Abruptly, all the flying books paused as the goddess of wisdom turned towards her younger sister with a glare. "This one is important. It might be a matter of life and death," she said. "You say that every time, sister." Artemis fired back, before getting a pensive look. "Wait. Is this about what happened yesterday? I thought we agreed it was Hermes." The huntress narrowed her eyes at her older sister. While Demeter wanted to blame Hades, the rest of the council had shot down her demand for an invasion of the underworld. Hermes was the next suspect, and despite his denials, the rest of their family didn't believe him out of habit. It didn't help that Apollo didn't confirm whether or not Hermes was lying, since the god of the sun was mad at his brother for one thing or another. Thus, Hermes had to face his aunt's wrath even though he was innocent of the crime. Artemis didn't particularly care for what happened to her brother. Even if he was innocent, many agreed he had it coming for all the pranks and mischief he pulled. "Yes. And what's been happening the last few weeks? I've been to her garden to investigate, and I even sent probes throughout Olympus, and you know what I found?" Athena asked, but before her sister could answer, she continued, "Nothing. I found nothing. No footprints, no DNA, not even an energy signature, and it doesn't make sense. No matter who or what you are, you will leave behind an energy footprint. And you can't tell me Demeter couldn't have sensed any one of us in her own backyard." Athena's frantic exclamation snapped Artemis out of her thoughts. And that. The wise deity wildly gestured to the enormous bulletin board where a map of the US and Japan alongside pictures of many Greek gods, and even some gods that the huntress did not recognize, were pinned. The surprising thing, however, were the 2 pictures of that one blonde man and his son pinned next to Japan with questions marks adorning them. "What about that?" Artemis asked curiously. The blonde man, Naruto and Uzumaki and his son Zetsu. "There are too many questions I have about them. You told me yourself they weren't normal. They don't act normally around us. I'm suspecting they're spies, scouts, vanguards from the Shinto to start another war. I don't know." The wiser sister had seemingly foregone her title as she looked ready to pull her hair out. Artemis deadpanned at the sight. She's in conspiracy mode again, she thought before deciding on her next step. "All right, sister, I think you need some rest." The goddess of the hunt raised her arms in a calming gesture and approached her sister again, intending to hold her comfortingly. "I don't need sleep. I need answers. My daughter is with them, Artemis." Athena trudged and sat down on her desk while holding her head in her arms. "My little Annabeth might die," she continued in despair. The goddess of the moon sighed. She could understand her sister's worries, especially concerning the little demi-goddess, since even with her freedom to watch over their children, gods could do nothing to help them physically because of the ancient laws enforced by Zeus. Artemis sighed at the entire situation before looking at her sister with a soft smile. "If you want, I can turn that guy into a jackalope for you," her gentle tone contradicted the sinister nature of her words. Athena sighed as well before rising from her seat with a hand to her head. "No, it's fine, you're right, sister." The goddess of wisdom approached her sister and enveloped her in a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. We're sisters, Athena, it's the least I could do, and don't worry, I'm sure nothing bad will happen to Annabeth, I'll watch over her for you, th. Moon deity returned her sister's hug with vigor before walking with her to the temple's bedroom. Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. SOOOO good. Naruto shouted in glee. His son and the demigods' reactions weren't far off. As the younger Uzumaki had simply gone catatonic while the kids had forgotten their manners in favor of practically inhaling their portions, something that had Hestia both happy and frowning at the spectacle. She could take it as a compliment, yes, but table manners were a must. She looked at the eldest blonde and resumed her own meal with delicate poise, humming in satisfaction at her work. Unknown to the younger occupants of the table, the goddess and the sage were having a more serious mental conversation, or at least she was trying to. Hestia cha. On, the blonde in question whined like a child. No, even telepathically, the goddess managed to project the image of herself crossing her arms, with a displeased expression. Oh come on. It'll be fun. I'll take care of you like all the others. The man insisted. I refuse to abandon Olympus, Naruto. The deity unapologetically cut into his enthusiasm. She could feel flattered by the fact that such a powerful being liked her food so much, but she wasn't letting go of her family anytime soon. You ain't abandoning it. You're just gonna be working for me part-time, all the time. Please. I roar. Ely ever found someone who could beat mine in Zetsu's standards. And you blew right through him with those delicious pancakes. Hell, let me sweeten the deal. I got great benefits. He pleaded. No. LL the earthly and supernatural ingredients you need. I can get them. Think of the great ramen you can make with that. No. How about weekends? Just weekends. No. And this is my final answer, Naruto. Also, please get back on our previous subject. She tried to divert the conversation back to her original point. Fiend. But this ain't over. Hestia mentally rolled her eyes at his stubbornness. He trailed off. Single quote. What was the question again? The blonde man said sheepishly, making the goddess mentally facepalm. She was sympathizing with Zetsu more and more. It was dealing with one of her more empty-headed nephews, or her younger brothers whenever a pretty woman passed by. I asked you why aren't you telling the kids about yourself? They're nice kids, I am sure they'll still accept you either way. It simply made sense to the goddess to be honest with the demigods. They were kind children and obviously cared about the two Uzumakis a lot, there wasn't any need for this drama. It was unrealistic and illogical, as her wise niece would put it. Apollo could learn a thing or two about it since he loved using that ridiculous plotline in so many of his movies. Hestia-chan, you're a great gal. But can you say the same about all of your family? The man surprised her with the answer, so much so that she had no immediate response. Single quote. I'm not lying to hurt them but to protect them. I don't need your little brother to declare them guilty by association, the sage elaborated. You've never met him. Zeus wouldn't do that. Hestia felt the need to court her brother even if he knew that the man was partly right. She loved Zeus as any big sister would, but there was indeed a very high possibility that her brother would have tried blasting Naruto and anyone associated with him. She could even understand his paranoia in this case. Pantheonic threats like Naruto, the keyword being threat, were rarely known to be so kind or courteous. Maybe not. But I have enough experience with his type to know some risks aren't worth taking, he said, and the deity internally winced. They won't be in danger, Naruto, she assured. Even if Zeus somehow found out about this, she wouldn't let him go smite the children. Oh, I know they won't, I won't let him be. But I don't need the kids feeling like their own family is actively out to get them, they already went through a lot. The sage clarified and made Hestia let out an in understanding. Powerful as he may be, one could not simply change people's emotions, and if someone like Talia had to her own father turn his lightning bolt against her, the goddess of the hearth had no doubt she'd be scarred mentally. Single quote. Hestia had no response to the man, and he seemingly took it as his cue to cut off the mental connection. Returning to his food with eagerness. Breakfast after that had passed without any incident. Hestia had even dropped the additional issue she wanted to discuss concerning Zetsu's missing clone. The goddess had been reminded through their conversation of the whole purpose of the sage's trip, to have a vacation without attracting attention. It's not working out too well, is it? The veiled deity had to suppress another giggle. The father and son were certainly a refreshing sight. She'd rarely seen beings of their level interact with mortals so casually, to the point of almost fooling her into believing they were mortals themselves, had she not known better. Ah well, she'd wait and see where this adventure would take her. You sure you don't wanna work for me? Single quote. No. Ah. Later. The group stood outside the emporium and in front of Hestia with their bags packed. The goddess in question smiled kindly at the group. I'm sorry that I have to go for now, but I must go back to Olympus. I haven't notified anyone of my absence. Ah. No problem, Hestia chr. I mean Lady Hestia. The blonde man threw a conspiratorial wink that had both Hestia and Zetsu rolling their eyes at the man. Thank you for the delicious meal you've made us. What do you say, kids? He said and bowed to the deity. Naruto needn't tell them twice. While Luke and Talia opted to throw in their own thanks, Annabeth, cutely enough, copied Zetsu as the younger Uzumaki bowed as well in gratitude. Thanks, big sis. Those were the best pancakes I've ever had, the boy added telepathically. Now comfortable calling the goddess with that title, much to her delight. Naruto would have added his own piece, had he not been gushing over the youngest demi-goddess who was now shyly holding onto his pant leg. Ah, she's so cute. You foo. I'm restraining myself from pinching her rosy cheeks, the goddess agreed. Yeah, an air about the blonde was mentally cut off. The answer remains the same, Naruto. Hestia sent him a small glare. Ah poo, the oldest being between them pouted like a child. I'm sorry to bother you, Lady Hestia, but before you leave, could you show us where Camp Half-Blood is? Talia's voice cut through the mental conversation both adults were having. She seemed extremely nervous about asking the question, as if afraid of repercussions. That sight made the deity's heart ache. A child shouldn't look at her own aunt in such a way. The goddess thought in sadness. She swiftly approached the two, making them reflexively flinch, before she raised her hands and encircled them in a hug. Talia dear, you don't need to be so formal with me, she said softly, making both teens blink in surprise. I am your aunt, and Luke dear, you are my grand-nephew, she continued gently. Naruto saw the scene and nudged Annabeth forward while she looked back at him nervously. Hestia felt a small weight at her side and smiled when she saw the young girl tentatively hugging her side. We're family, the goddess spoke softly and felt the children relax in her hold, both from her words and her warm aura. After a few minutes of silence, they separated before the goddess held both teens by the shoulders. While Annabeth went to stand between them. Go to Montauk, at the end of Long Island, Hestia said as she conjured a small piece of paper with an address written on it and handed it to Naruto. Camp Half-Blood, Half-Blood Hill, Farm Road 3.141, Long Island, New York, 11954, the man read with a raised eyebrow. Well, that's that. Let's go, kids. We got a long journey ahead of us. The elder Uzumaki cheerfully declared, ushered the kids to the row, and had Zetsu follow them. Thanks, Aunt Hestia. Thank you, Hestia. Thanks, Auntie, were the final words of Talia, Luke, and Annabeth respectively as they trudged away with Zetsu moving after them as well. Thanks again, big sis, the younger Uzumaki muttered when he passed by her, not sparing her glance even though the deity could see his cheeks color a bit. Hestia's heart soared at the words, and she internally swore to watch over the group. She suddenly felt a light pat on her back and turned to find Naruto standing with his face stretched in a grin. Big sis, huh? Welcome to the family, Hestia-chan, he said, low enough for the kids not to hear him, and making the goddess's face turn gold in embarrassment. Shush, she gave him a glare and only received a chuckle in response. The sage stopped laughing abruptly and turned to her with a serious expression. Both entities seemed to be having another mental conversation with each other before Hestia nodded with narrowed eyes and snapped her fingers. Naruto for his part, sent a pulse of chakra through the ground, locating all the statues in the yard, before another pulse had the stone structures sink into the ground, leaving several mounds of dirt. Hestia looked around in amazement as small rock slabs rose at the edge of each statue's grave, acting as a makeshift tombstone. And turned to the man with an appreciative gaze. Nodding to her gratefully, he clasped his hand before him and uttered a short prayer before leaving to join the kids, who had, in the demigods, cases. been subjected briefly to the goddess's control over the mist, blocking any sound or movement that Naruto's technique had made. The sage suddenly stopped a few feet away from her, making her raise an eyebrow and wonder if he forgot anything. He disappeared suddenly, and before Hestia could wonder what was happening, she felt a familiar weight on her head. Pat pat, she heard He-Man exclaim and run off with a laugh before she could deliver any just retribution for his embarrassing actions. The goddess sighed with a furious blush at the sage's antics. She looked at the P's retreating backs and silently wished them good luck, before teleporting away with only 3 questions on her mind. What manner of chaos would unfold if anyone else were to discover them? Who could such a powerful being be praying to? And more alarmingly, did she just get adopted? What? That's it for today. I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe. And make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.